Chapter 25:14. Implanting a demonic seed in his body would undoubtedly cause Yun Tianyi to completely fall into the demonic path. However, Yun Tianyi agreed without any hesitation. Because he had always wanted to surpass Shao Chen and was unwilling to accept this, Yun Tianyi did not hesitate to fall into the demonic path in order to have the strength to fight against Shao Chen. Perhaps Mo He's words had an effect. So what if he was a demonic path? This world was not as simple as black and white. As long as he could defeat Shao Chen and lead Mu Tian Mountain to become the overlord of the entire Great Thousand World, the demonic path would become the righteous path, and the righteous path would become the demonic path. In the end, everything still depended on strength. Whoever was stronger would be right. After all, history was written by the victors. Nodding heavily, Yun Tianyi cupped his hands and bowed to Helmut Mo and the other two. Junior thanks Senior. You are teachable. Not bad, not bad. Listen to my arrangements from now on. Mo He nodded and laughed in a hoarse voice. Yun Tianyi's performance made Mo He very happy. Yun Tianyi was very sensible. However, implanting a demonic seed was not as simple as Yun Tianyi thought. In other words, Mo He had deceived Yun Tianyi. Orthodox demonic cultivators would not implant any demonic seeds in their bodies. In other words, demonic seeds did not exist at all. The cultivation of demonic cultivators was actually the same as that of righteous cultivators. They both needed to rely on their own strength to cultivate step by step. What was a demonic seed? To put it bluntly, it was a forced transfer of strength. Some demonic cultivators would condense a demonic seed in another cultivator's body and use the demonic seed as a foundation to forcibly transfer strength to another cultivator. This could indeed increase the cultivator's strength in a short period of time. However, the drawbacks of doing this were also very obvious. Although it could allow one's strength to soar in a short period of time, the demonic qi would continuously erode the cultivator's meridians and internal organs over time. In the end, the cultivator would not be able to suppress the demonic qi and would only die. To put it bluntly, if a power that was not one's own was forcefully channeled into one's body, what were the consequences of doing so? There was no such thing as a free lunch in the world, and there was no one who could casually reach the heavens in a single step. Every power that was casually obtained had a huge hidden danger. Unfortunately, Yun Tianyi didn't think about this at all. Or rather, he didn't even think about it. In Yun Tianyi's mind, he only wanted to become stronger so that he could fight against Shao Chen. Helmut Mo and the other two had deceived and made use of Yun Tianyi. Their goal was simple, and that was to cause chaos in the Great Thousand World. They would temporarily give Yun Tianyi power, and they could even give everyone on Mu Tian Mountain power. However, even if Mu Tian Mountain won, those who had planted the demonic seeds and obtained power would not have a good ending. They would definitely die. However, this wasn't a problem that the three of them had to consider. Mu Tianshan's life and death had nothing to do with them. To put it bluntly, they were just using him. As for what would happen to these people in the end, it wasn't within the scope of their consideration. Yun Tianyi had completely fallen into Helmut Mo and the other two's trap. Unfortunately, Yun Tianyi wasn't prepared at all. Looking at Yun Tianyi, who was nodding heavily with a determined look in his eyes, Helmut Mo said, "Next, you just need to calm your mind and concentrate. I will plant a demonic seed in your body. You can't resist at all." Hearing Helmut Mo's command, Yun Tianyi sat cross-legged on the futon. Helmut Mo also went behind Yun Tianyi and gently pressed his hands on Yun Tianyi's back. Then, streams of demonic qi began to flow into Yun Tianyi's body. Yun Tianyi had never come into contact with demonic qi, but when the demonic qi entered his body, Yun Tianyi clearly felt a chill. This wasn't an ordinary chill, but a chill that made one's soul tremble. Demonic qi was different from spiritual power. The demonic qi of a demonic cultivator was indeed much colder than the spiritual power of a righteous cultivator. If Helmut Mo hadn't controlled the amount of demonic qi that entered Yuntiany's body, Yuntiany would have been killed by the demonic qi. Sensing Yuntiany's pain, Helmut Mo said, "Hold on. I'm here for everything." At this time, the demonic seed hadn't been formed in Yuntiany's body, so it couldn't be interrupted. Therefore, Yuntiany had to endure the soul-deep chill. Otherwise, all his previous efforts would be wasted. Moreover, Yuntiany would probably be seriously injured by the demonic qi. At that time, even if he didn't die, he would be crippled. Hearing Helmut Mo's words, Yuntiany clenched his teeth and tried his best to stay awake. At the same time, he silently endured the soul-deep chill. After 2 hours, Yuntiany could clearly feel that his dantian was slowly being transformed by Helmut Mo's demonic qi. His original dantian was now enveloped by demonic qi. The demonic qi continued to enter his dantian as if it was trying to assimilate his dantian, making it more compatible with the demonic qi of a demonic cultivator. That's right, the demonic seed was formed using a cultivator's original dantian. The dantian of a righteous cultivator naturally couldn't be compatible with the demonic qi. However, with the help of a demonic cultivator, the dantian of a righteous cultivator could be assimilated and become the so-called demonic seed. However, all of this was only on the surface. Although the dantian seemed to have been assimilated by the demonic qi, in reality, the two forces still existed in the dantian. It was just that the demonic qi was temporarily suppressing the spiritual power. This was also why the demonic seed could allow one's strength to increase by leaps and bounds in a short period of time, but would be completely destroyed after a long period of time. It was because the demonic seed couldn't always suppress the spiritual power in the dantian. Once the two forces completely erupted, it was enough to crush a person's meridians and internal organs. Yuntiany still didn't know about this. He felt that his dantian was being assimilated bit by bit. After a day, the demonic seed was successfully formed in Yuntiany's body. At this time, Helmut Mo said, "The demonic seed has been formed. Next, I'll help you increase your cultivation." Hearing Mo's words, Yuntiany was overjoyed. Then, he felt the terrifying demonic qi continuously enter his body and quickly flow through his meridians. This demonic qi naturally came from Mo. As a complete ancestor realm expert, it wasn't difficult for Mo to forcefully increase Yuntiany's cultivation. For a moment, Yuntiany could clearly feel that his cultivation was constantly rising, all the way to the Emperor realm. In just a few hours, he had already reached the limit of the complete end realm. Such a speed of improvement made Yuntiany feel incomparably refreshed. At the same time, it made him even more certain of the choice in his heart. This was power. This was what Yuntiany had always wanted. For this, Yuntiany didn't hesitate to fall into the demonic path. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 25:15. In just a few hours, Yuntiany's cultivation had already reached the grand perfection end realm. This kind of cultivation speed was something Yuntiany had never experienced before in his life. As he carefully sensed the increase in his strength, Yuntiany felt even more fortunate that he had made the right choice. Only with strength could one obtain everything. As for whether it was the demon path or the righteous path, Yuntiany no longer cared about it. So what if it was the demon path or the righteous path? Just as Yuntiany was secretly feeling excited, Mo suddenly said, "Calm your mind and focus. This old master will help you break through to the Emperor realm." Using the demon seed, it wasn't too difficult for Mo to help Yuntiany break through to the Emperor realm. After all, Yuntiany wasn't relying on his own strength to break through. It could be said that he was forcefully breaking through, and there would be major hidden dangers in the future. As long as Yuntiany didn't resist, Mo would definitely be able to help him break through. Hearing Mo's words, Yuntiany no longer resisted. With the help of Mo's powerful demon chi, Yuntiany's cultivation easily broke through to the Emperor realm. Feeling the powerful aura of the Emperor realm, Yuntiany was in a good mood. He couldn't help but want to roar towards the sky. This is the strength of an Emperor realm master. I, Yuntiany, have finally broken through to the Emperor realm. The Emperor realm was once Yuntiany's dream. In fact, even without Mo with Yuntiany's talent, he would have broken through to the Emperor realm sooner or later. Moreover, he would have broken through to the Emperor realm with his own strength. However, Yuntiany obviously couldn't wait that long because he wanted to catch up to Xiao Chen. Obviously, ordinary methods wouldn't work. After all, Xiao Chen's talent was above Yuntiany's. Moreover, Xiao Chen was a person with great fortune. He had many more opportunities than Yuntiany. Therefore, Yuntiany estimated that he wouldn't be able to catch up to Xiao Chen even if he cultivated normally. He could only find another way. Now that he had succeeded, and his cultivation had broken through to the Emperor realm in such a short time, Yuntiany's confidence soared. He finally had the ability to compete with Xiao Chen. However, he had just broken through to the Emperor realm, so he obviously wasn't qualified to compete with Xiao Chen. But even with the demon seed, he wasn't going to let Yuntiany break through again. Firstly, Yuntiany couldn't bear more demon chi, and secondly, he had just broken through to the Emperor realm. If he wanted to continue breaking through, even with Mo's help, it would be much more difficult. The best way was to let Yuntiany immerse himself in his cultivation for a while and completely adapt to the strength of an Emperor realm master. That way, Mo could help Yuntiany improve his cultivation again, which would allow him to achieve twice the result with half the effort. Exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, Mo slowly withdrew his demonic aura. Even so, Yuntiany had completely fallen into the demonic path, and all the spiritual energy in his body had turned into demonic aura. Not bad, you have successfully broken through to the Emperor realm. Take a few days to adapt, and when the time comes, this old master will help you improve your cultivation again. At that time, you will be able to compete with Xiao Chen, Mo faintly said with a faint smile on his face. Yuntiany seemed a little disappointed when Mo stopped, but such progress was indeed enough to make him excited. Yuntiany immediately cupped his fists and bowed to Mo. Many thanks, senior. It's fine, this old master already said that he would help you break through. Mo waved his hand indifferently when he heard this. This silly boy is so excited now, but when the demon chi recoils in the future, he will probably regret it. However, this obviously had nothing to do with Mo. To put it bluntly, Yuntiany and even the entire Mu Tian mountain were just pawns in Mo's hands. Now, this pawn still had some value, so Mo didn't mind giving Yuntiany some benefits. When this pawn was no longer useful, Mo wouldn't even spare him a glance and would just throw him away. Mo didn't care about Yuntiany's gratitude, because there was no need for it. Yuntiany was already a dying man, and the demon chi had entered his body. There would be a day when he couldn't suppress it. However, Mo naturally wouldn't tell Yuntiany about this. After successfully helping Yuntiany break through to the Emperor realm, Mo said indifferently. This old master said before that he would help your Mu Tian mountain deal with the sword sect, and now that you have personally experienced it, this old master wants the entire Mu Tian mountain to listen to me. Mo bluntly stated his request. In response, Yuntiany, who had been overwhelmed by his strength, actually nodded and agreed without the slightest hesitation. Senior, don't worry. I will introduce my father to you. Without any hesitation, Yuntiany chose to submit to Mo. There was nothing he could do about it. The temptation brought about by great strength was something Yuntiany couldn't resist. After this experience, Yuntiany wanted even greater strength, and only Mo could give him this strength. Hearing Yuntiany's words, Mo nodded with a smile. Obviously, he was very satisfied with Yuntiany's answer. Man's desires were endless, just like Yuntiany now. After breaking through to the Emperor realm, Yuntiani still wasn't satisfied. He wanted more power. Emperor realm minor perfection, Emperor realm grand perfection, Emperor realm grand perfection, and even Ancestor realm. This was Yuntiani's desire. He was completely blinded by power. Looking at Yuntiani in front of him, he was secretly amused, but he didn't point it out. Only by doing so could he better control Yuntiani, and even the entire Mu Tian mountain. Soon, under Yuntiani's lead, the group of 4 arrived at Yun Chen's residence. Seeing He's trio for the first time, Yun Chen was also stunned. However, after hearing Yuntiani's words, Yun Chen's face turned completely gloomy. "Father, Senior He and the others are here to help us. Your son has already broken through to the Emperor realm, so this is an opportunity." Yuntiani chattered in Yun Cheng's ear, trying his best to persuade Yun Chen to submit to He and the others. Hearing Yuntiani's words, Yun Chen also sensed Yuntiani's cultivation. It was indeed at the Emperor realm, but the current Yuntiani's aura was completely different from before. With Yun Chen's eyesight, he could naturally see that Yuntiani had completely fallen into the demon Dao. With demon qi all over his body, Yun Chen was naturally more cautious than Yuntiani. He didn't give an answer immediately. Even though Yuntiani had broken through to the Emperor realm with He's help, Yun Chen was still hesitating. After a long silence, Yun Chen looked at He and the others and cupped his fists. 3 seniors, my Mu Tian mountain has submitted to the great demon world. In the future, will I have to offer the entire great thousand world to the great demon world? As Yun Chen, he clearly thought of many more problems than Yuntiani. He also knew that once he submitted, although he could obtain many benefits, he would definitely have to pay a price. After all, there was no one in this world who would help you for no reason, especially when both parties did not know each other. Please add, recommend, and vote. End of this chapter. Chapter 25:16. Yun Chen was obviously unwilling to sacrifice the entire Great Thousand World. This was because even if Mu Tian Mountain became the overlord of the Great Thousand World in the end, they would still be a pawn in someone else's hands. Yun Chen was obviously unwilling to sacrifice the entire Great Thousand World. This was because even if Mu Tian Mountain became the overlord of the Great Thousand World in the end, they would still be a pawn in someone else's hands. Therefore, Yun Chen hesitated when he saw He and the other 2. However, He smiled and said, "There's no need for that. The great demonic world is not interested in the Great Thousand World. The reason why we are taking action is because of Immortal Hall and Cloud Palace. You can understand it as the great demonic world not being willing to let Immortal Hall and Cloud Palace obtain the Great Thousand World." He had no intention of making the Great Thousand World submit. Of course, no one knew whether he meant it or not. However, Yuntiani and Yun Chen had already planted the demonic seed in them and were about to die. What would happen in the future have to do with them? Yun Chen did not know what He was thinking. When he heard what He said, his expression turned slightly better. He could accept it. In the end, under Yuntiani's persuasion, Yun Chen agreed to submit to He and the other 2. Of course, He and the other 2 would help Mu Tian Mountain increase its strength, but Mu Tian Mountain would also become a weapon in their hands to deal with the Sword Sect. He and the other 2 did not intend to deal with the Sword Sect directly. After all, Lin Yuan and Gong Nantian were not to be trifled with. Not to mention that He and the other 2 only sent their demonic avatars. Even if they sent their actual bodies, they would not be able to deal with the Sword Sect. Therefore, He and the other 2 did not intend to attack directly. Instead, they wanted to use Mu Tian Mountain as a form of exchange. Yun Chen naturally had no objections to this. After all, Mu Tian Mountain and the Sword Sect were on opposite sides. Based on the father and son's previous choice, even without He and the other 3, Mu Tian Mountain would not choose to submit to the Sword Sect. As Yun Chen nodded, the smiles in the eyes of Mo He and the other two grew even wider. Mo He then smiled and said, "That's right. Next, this old man will help you break through to the ancestor stage. However, forcefully breaking through to the ancestor stage is not an easy task. Some preparations will be required." Yun Chen was an Emperor Realm Master, so even if he had planted a demon seed and relied on this almost suicidal method of cultivation, it would still not be easy for him to break through to the ancestor realm, so Mo he still needed to make some preparations. As for what he was going to prepare, Mo he didn't say. Because if he did, Yun Chen would probably back out. To put it simply, if Yun Chen wanted to break through to the progenitor realm, other than planting a demonic seed and obtaining Mo's help, he also needed to burn his lifespan. Yes, utilizing Yun Chen's own lifespan to forcefully assist him in breaking through into the universe enlightened ancestral realm was the only way. Of course, once he did this, then Yun Chen would obviously not be able to live for long. But so what? From the moment the demonic seed was planted, the outcome was already decided. Even a demon cultivator wouldn't plant a demonic seed in his own body, which was enough to explain everything. After all, this was a life-threatening thing, so who would plant a demonic seed in their own body? Yun Chen and Yun Tianyi didn't know what the outcome of their choice would be, nor did they realize what kind of disaster their choice would bring to Mu Tian Mountain. At this time, Yun Chen and Yun Tianyi had already fallen under the temptation of great strength. Mu Tian Mountain had secretly stood together with Mauve and the other two, and the Sword Sect obviously didn't know about this. Lin Yuan, Gong Nan Tian, and the others also didn't notice that Mauve and the other two had returned to the Great Thousand World. At this time, in the Sword Sect, Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and Li Chun were cultivating with Lin Hu and Yu Luo. Having two Ancestor Realm Masters personally know that everyone was cultivating was naturally something that everyone wished for. Time passed day by day, and the Great Thousand World gradually regained its peace. The Sword Sect didn't intend to be aggressive and didn't forcefully control the entire Great Thousand World. The Sword Sect's position as the Overlord wasn't recognized by all forces, and the Sword Sect didn't seem to care about this at all. They didn't plan to take any further action. However, many forces knew that this wasn't because the Sword Sect was magnanimous, and it wasn't because the Sword Sect was kind. Instead, it was because the Sword Sect didn't have the time to do anything after the war between the good and evil had just ended. Sect Master Xiao Chen was in seclusion in the land of Source Energy, and Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and even Song Xing were busy cultivating. With Ancestor Realm Masters like Lin Yuan and Gong Nan Tian intentionally helping to improve their strength, the Sword Sect naturally wouldn't miss this opportunity. As for the matters of the Great Thousand World, when they were free, the Sword Sect would naturally deal with it. Moreover, Lin Yuan and Gong Nan Tian also said that they wouldn't stay in the Great Thousand World for too long. After they finished teaching the Sword Sect, they would leave. Who would be willing to miss such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Naturally, it was clear which one was more important. Everyone in Swords Gate was busy with their cultivation. Under such a peaceful atmosphere, a month quickly passed. In this month, everyone improved greatly under the guidance of Lin Yuan and the other three, especially Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Dao Ju, and Xiao Xiao. In terms of talent, Xianyuan Ling and the other three were definitely stronger than Song Xing and the other Vice Sect Masters, so their improvement was the most obvious. At this time, all of them had reached the complete End Realm, and even vaguely touched the threshold of the Emperor Realm. Clearly, they had reached the critical point of breaking through to the Emperor Realm. Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing and the others were naturally extremely excited about such progress. The Emperor Realm was once the ultimate dream in everyone's hearts, and now, it was finally about to be realized. Lin Yuan, Gong Nan Tian, and the others didn't seem to care about breaking through to the Emperor Realm. After all, an Emperor Realm Master was nothing in Cloud Palace and Immortal Palace. Any ordinary elder had an Emperor Realm cultivation, so there was nothing to be surprised about. On this day, Lin Yuan and Gong Nantian rarely showed up in a cultivation-sealed world in Cloud Palace because today was the day when Xian Yuan Ling and the other three were in seclusion to break through to the Emperor Realm. It was almost time. Although Xian Yuan Ling and Long Qing's foundation was still a little lacking compared to breaking through to the Emperor Realm, they had no choice. Lin Yuan and the others couldn't stay in the Great Thousand World forever, so they could only choose to break through. According to Lin Yuan and Gong Nantian's plan, after Xian Yuan Ling and the others broke through, the four of them would leave the Great Thousand World. At that time, the Great Thousand World would be managed by the Sword Sect. After this breakthrough, it wouldn't be difficult for the Sword Sect to control the Great Thousand World with their strength. This is a pill personally refined by the 9 Cloud Palace's Medicine Palace Master. It can greatly increase your chances of breaking through to the Emperor Realm. Later, calm your mind and focus. Follow the guidance of the four of us to comprehend the Emperor Realm. It shouldn't be difficult to successfully break through, Lin Hu said faintly as he took out 4 pills and handed them to Xian Yuan Ling and the others. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of this chapter. Chapter 25:17. A pill personally refined by the Palace Master of the 9 Palaces Medicine Palace was definitely a supreme treasure. Looking at the Longan-sized pill in their hands, Xian Yuan Ling, Long Qing, and the others couldn't help but reveal a hint of excitement. A pill personally refined by the Palace Master of the 9 Palaces Medicine Palace was definitely a supreme treasure. Looking at the Longan-sized pill in their hands, Xian Yuan Ling, Long Qing, and the others couldn't help but reveal a hint of excitement. They were finally about to break through to the Emperor Realm. In just a month, under the guidance of Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the others, as well as the support of various cultivation resources that they had never seen before, Xian Yuan Ling and the others had made rapid progress. However, with such rapid progress, Lin Yuan and Nangong Guan had solemnly reminded Xian Yuan Ling that Long Qing and the others must prioritize stabilizing their cultivation after breaking through to the Emperor Realm. They must not make any further breakthroughs, otherwise their foundation would be unstable. This breakthrough to the Emperor Realm was indeed a little rushed for Xian Yuan Ling, Long Qing, and the others, but there was no other way. Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the others didn't have much time, so this was the only way. However, Lin Yuan and the others wouldn't directly destroy the future of Xian Yuan Ling and the others like Mo He and the others. Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the others didn't have any hidden dangers for Xian Yuan Ling and the others, so there was no need to worry. According to the instructions of Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the others, Xian Yuan Ling, Long Qing, and the others sat cross-legged and swallowed the pills in their hands, beginning their breakthroughs. The breakthroughs of Xian Yuan Ling, Long Qing, and the others were no secret in the Sword Sect. Many people knew that Xian Yuan Ling, Long Qing, and the others were in seclusion to break through to the Emperor Realm, so many people were looking forward to it. One had to know that if they succeeded this time, the Great Thousand World would have 4 more Emperor Realm Masters at once. This was something unimaginable in the past. In the past, the Emperor Realm was the top figure in the Great Thousand World, but now, after the Great Thousand World was connected to other universes, the Emperor Realm no longer seemed so unreachable because there were Ancestor Realm Masters above the Emperor Realm, and above the Ancestor Realm Masters there were World Masters. Of course, there were not many cultivators in the great wide world who knew about World Masters. To them, the Progenitor Realm was an existence that left them in the dust. Many disciples of the Sword Sect were waiting for the results of Xian Yuan Ling and the other 3. As for Tsang Xing and the other deputy sect masters, after this period of cultivation, they had also gained a lot. Although they did not directly break through to the Ancestor Realm like Xian Yuan Ling and the other 3, with the help of Lin Yuan, Gong Nan Tian, and the other vice-sect leaders, Song Xing and the other vice-sect leaders all reached half-step Emperor realm. The reason why they did not directly break through to the Emperor realm was that Song Xing and the other vice-sect leaders were still young, and their talent had almost been exhausted. It was impossible for them to compare with Xianyuan Ling and the other three. Moreover, after failing to break through, according to Lin Yuan, Gong Nan Tian, and the other two vice-sect leaders, it was obviously not suitable for them to continue breaking through. If they forced a breakthrough, although there was a way to let Song Xing and the others break through to the Emperor realm, their foundation would be completely destroyed. Lin Yuan, Gong Nan Tian, and the others were not like Mo He and the others, so they obviously could not do something like destroying their foundation. Moreover, Song Xing and the others were now half-step Emperor realm masters. Given some time, they would naturally be able to break through, so there was no need to rush. Song Xing and the others did not really break through to the Emperor realm. It would be a lie to say that they were not disappointed, but there was no other way. Moreover, Song Xing and the others had succeeded in taking half a step into the Emperor realm. They were also confident that as long as they were given time, they would be able to break through to the Emperor realm sooner or later. Without mentioning anything else, just the progress of Song Xing and the others had already increased the overall strength of the Sword Sect by a lot. One had to know that the vice-sect leaders of the Sword Sect were already half-step Emperor realm masters. If such a thing happened in the past, no one would have dared to think about it. A vice-sect leader with half-step Emperor realm masters. Such strength was enough to suppress all the great forces in the Great Thousand World. In this regard, the Sword Sect did not hide this. When the great forces heard this news, their expressions were extremely interesting. Not to mention two Emperor realm masters, even the vice-sect leaders had all broken through to half-step Emperor realm. From now on, which great force would dare to be enemies with the Sword Sect? With the help of Lin Yuan, Gong Nan Tian, and the others, the Sword Sect's strength had improved by leaps and bounds. On the other side, Mu Tianshan, Mo He, and the others were not idle either. They were secretly helping Mu Tianshan to improve his strength. Of course, the first to bear the brunt was Yun Chen. Yun Chen was also the most important. After all, he wanted to break through to the Ancestor realm. Using demon seeds and forcibly burning his lifespan, Mo He, Mo Chi, and He Yang forcibly helped Yun Chen break through to the Ancestor realm. The three Ancestor realm masters took action at the same time and planted demon seeds in Yun Chen's body. Then, they forcibly burned Yun Chen's lifespan to improve his cultivation. A month passed and Yun Chen still had no intention of coming out of seclusion. However, his cultivation had already broken through to the Emperor realm grand perfection. At this point, Mo He and the others could no longer be of much help. Although the three of them had spent a lot of effort, whether Yun Chen could succeed in the end still depended on himself. If Yun Chen's strength was not enough, then he would not be able to break through to the Ancestor realm. Not only would he not be able to break through, Yun Chen would probably die directly. In Mu Tianshan's body, Mo He and the others no longer paid attention to Yun Chen. Everything was up to him. There was nothing they could do even if he failed. They were not worried that Yun Chen would trigger a heavenly tribulation when he broke through to the Ancestor realm. To put it bluntly, Yun Chen's Ancestor realm was too weak and would not trigger a heavenly tribulation at all. Compared to Xie Tian, Yun Chen's breakthrough this time was obviously more forceful. It was completely incomparable to a true Ancestor realm master. However, even so, he was still an Ancestor realm cultivator, not an ordinary Emperor realm master. These fools, do they think it's so easy to break through to the Ancestor realm? After leaving Yun Chen's retreat, Mo Chi revealed a contemptuous smile. Mo Chi obviously looked down on people who broke through to the Ancestor realm because they could not be considered as Ancestor realm masters at all. In response, Mo He just said indifferently, "All right. This person still has some value. Moreover, to compete with the sword sect, an ancestor realm master is a must. It doesn't matter if he's real or not. In any case, Yun Chen was already a dying man. In his final moments, he and the others would only try their best to suppress his value. As for anything else, it was not within their consideration. While Yun Chen was busy breaking through to the ancestor realm, another month passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, a muffled sound came from Yun Chen's body. Immediately, his aura broke through the comfortable emperor realm and reached a whole new level. Overjoyed, Yun Chen opened his eyes and said excitedly, "Success! This king has successfully broken through to the ancestor realm. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 25:18. Yun Chen's breakthrough could be said to be silent. Outsiders had no way of knowing about it. The heavenly tribulations of ancestor realm experts didn't appear in Yun Chen's case. Yun Chen's breakthrough could be said to be silent. Outsiders had no way of knowing about it. The heavenly tribulations of ancestor realm experts didn't appear in Yun Chen's case. The reason why Yun Chen didn't attract the heavenly tribulations was actually very simple. To put it bluntly, the heavenly laws didn't acknowledge Yun Chen's breakthrough and felt that he wasn't an ancestor realm expert. Naturally, the heavenly tribulations didn't descend. He was completely unaware of his current situation and didn't know that he didn't have much time left. In order to break through the so-called ancestor realm, Yun Chen could be said to have paid the price of his life. It was like the final madness. After the madness, everything would turn into nothingness. His eyes were filled with excitement. Following Yun Chen's breakthrough, he and the other two also appeared in front of him. When they saw the extremely excited Yun Chen, a trace of disdain flashed across their eyes. However, on the surface, he still spoke with a smile on his face. "Not bad, you have successfully broken through to the ancestor realm." It seemed like he was praising Yun Chen, but he didn't think so. Hearing He's words, Yun Chen stood up and cupped his hands. "Thank you, senior." He was still foolishly thanking he and the other two. This person was so stupid that it was simply laughable. He and the other two didn't say much in the face of Yun Chen's gratitude. They came out of seclusion together and went to their residence in Yun City. Yun Tianyi was also present. "All right, we have completed our mission. Now your Mu Tian Mountain's strength isn't weaker than the sword sect. The deputy sect masters are also half-step Emperor Realm expert. Many of your disciples are also improving rapidly. They can definitely fight with the sword sect," he said softly. Hearing this, Yun Chen was delighted. However, he immediately frowned and said, "Senior, are you leaving?" From he's words, Yun Chen naturally understood that the three were preparing to leave. He and the other two despised him in their hearts. What an idiot! He had already done what he needed to do. If he didn't leave, would he wait for Lin Yuan and Gong Nantian to kill him? This was especially true for he and Chi. They had already lost a devil image avatar previously. Therefore, it was naturally best that they did not lose another devil image avatar. Lin also said that the ownership of the Great Thousand World was not important. Anyway, it was enough to make the Immortal Palace and the Cloud Palace unhappy. Now, with the help of the three of them, Mu Tian Mountain was no longer the same as before. Of course, all of this was just for show. The people of Mu Tian Mountain wouldn't be able to live for long, especially the higher-ups of Mu Tian Mountain. Every single one of them had been planted with a demonic seed. When the demonic qi backfired on them, they would know what the outcome would be. Of course, now, the people of Mu Tian Mountain seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. Now that the matter was settled, all they had to do was sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. How much trouble Mu Tian Mountain could cause for the sword sect was not something that Mo and the other two needed to care about. As such, when he heard Yun Chen's words, Mo smiled and said, "It's about time. You guys settle the matters of the Great Thousand World by yourselves. However, it's best to wait until Lin Yuan and the others leave. After all, with Mu Tian Mountain's current strength, we are not qualified to provoke them. Mu Tian Mountain could contend with the Sword Sect, but it was far from being qualified to contend with Lin Yuan and Gong Nantian. Lin Yuan and Gong Nantian obviously could not stay in the Great Thousand World forever. Therefore, waiting for them to leave was the best choice. When Mu Tian Mountain and the Cloud Palace fought, the entire Great Thousand World would be in chaos again. This was the goal of Mo and the other two. As for time, they were not in a hurry. Even if they planted a demonic seed, they could at least jump around for a few years. As for Lin Yuan and Gong Nantian, it was impossible for them to stay in the Great Thousand World for a few years. Hearing Mo's words, Yun Chen was reluctant, but there was nothing he could do. After all, if Mo and the other two wanted to leave, Yun Chen could not stop them. They did not stay for long. Soon, Mo and the other two left. As for Yun Chen and Yun Tianyi, they were full of confidence at this time. However, they still remembered Mo's instructions to wait until Lin Yuan and Gong Nantian left. They did not know what happened at Mu Tian Mountain. At this moment, everyone in the Sword Sect was looking at Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and the other two. It had been more than a month since they entered seclusion. At this moment, violent spirit energy was constantly emitted from the cave mansion where Xianyuan Ling and the other three were. It was obvious that it was time for them to break through. Everyone was nervous because Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and the other three were breaking through to the Emperor realm this time. Under everyone's nervous gaze, a few days passed. On this day, 4 terrifying auras soared into the sky from the cave mansion where Xianyuan Ling and the other three were. Suddenly, a dense heavenly punishment appeared in the sky. Heavenly punishment? They broke through? Feeling the pressure of heavenly punishment, Song Xing and the other vice sect masters appeared immediately. Looking at the heavenly punishment condensing in the sky from afar, they all had excited looks on their faces. The appearance of heavenly punishment proved that Xianyuan Ling and the other three had successfully broken through. At the same time, in the cave mansion, Xianyuan Ling and the other three who had successfully broken through were also very excited. During this seclusion, the 4 of them had successfully broken through to the Emperor realm. This could be said to be a miracle. Of course, it was more due to the help of Lin Yuan and Gong Nantian. If it were not for Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the other two, Xianyuan Ling and the others might not have been able to break through to the Emperor realm so smoothly. But no matter what, the final result was that the 4 of them had succeeded. How could the 4 of them not be excited? However, before the 4 of them could be happy for too long, Lin Yuan had already spoken. "All right, prepare to take on heavenly punishment." Having said that, Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the other two left. Heavenly punishment could only rely on the strength of Xianyuan Ling and the others. If Lin Yuan and the others took action, not only would they not be able to help Xianyuan Ling and the others, they would also harm them, just like Xie Tian. Hearing Lin Yuan's words, the smiles on Xianyuan Ling and the others' faces disappeared. Then, one by one, they raised their heads to look at the sky, feeling the strong heavenly punishment. They left the Sword Sect at the same time. The destructive power of heavenly punishment at the Emperor realm was very great. If they were in the Sword Sect, the impact of heavenly punishment would be too great. Therefore, Xianyuan Ling and the others chose to leave the Sword Sect immediately and go to a deserted place to pass heavenly punishment. When the 4 of them left, heavenly punishment naturally followed closely behind. Soon, the strong heavenly punishment pressure above the Sword Sect dissipated. However, everyone's eyes were now looking in the direction where Xianyuan Ling and the others left. Whether they could pass heavenly punishment or not, this was the final test. However, many people still believed that with the strength of Xianyuan Ling and the others, there shouldn't be too much of a problem. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 25:19. The Emperor Realm's heavenly punishment was naturally not to be underestimated, but Xianyuan Ling and the other four were all extraordinarily talented and had many means of their own, so it should not be difficult for them to overcome the Emperor Realm's heavenly punishment. In a wasteland far away from the Sword Sect, the heavenly punishment fell and Xianyuan Ling and the other four faced it head-on. Everyone in the Sword Sect was waiting for the result of the Five's breakthrough, and in the end, Xianyuan Ling and the other four did not disappoint. After about 2 hours, Xianyuan Ling and the other four returned one after another. Although the 5 of them seemed to be injured, the result was perfect. The 5 of them had successfully overcome the Emperor Realm's heavenly punishment and stepped into the Emperor Realm. The 5 of them returned to the Sword Sect one after another, and in the main hall of the Sword Sect, after swallowing healing pills, the injuries of Xianyuan Ling and the other four were quickly under control. Then, a look of unconcealable excitement appeared on their faces. The Emperor Realm, once upon a time, was the strongest existence in the Great Thousand World, an existence that people could only look up to. Today, Xianyuan Ling and the other four had finally reached this step. Even Song Xing and the other Vice Sect masters of the Sword Sect looked at the 5 with envy in their eyes. There was nothing they could do. The current Xianyuan Ling and the other four had already surpassed them. With the 5's breakthrough, in addition to the Sword Sect, the Moon Palace, Saber Sect, and Heavenly Policy Palace also ushered in the era of 2 emperors in the Great Thousand World. If it was in the past, many forces would not have dared to imagine having 2 emperors. Moreover, if anyone could achieve this, they would have dominated the Great Thousand World long ago. But now, even if these 3 forces had 2 emperors, they were still incomparable to the Sword Sect, because at the same time, Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing had also successfully stepped into the Emperor Realm. With the breakthrough of Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, the Sword Sect now had 4 emperors. Moreover, Jun Weia was still in seclusion, and no one knew if he could break through to the Ancestor Realm. Once Jun Weia broke through to the Ancestor Realm, the strength of the Sword Sect would skyrocket. It could be said that this time, Xiao Xiao, Dao Ju, and Li Chun were basking in the glory of the Sword Sect, and the Sword Sect was willing to give them some benefits to tell the other forces that there was no harm in surrendering to the Sword Sect. Just look at the Moon Palace, Saber Sect, and Heavenly Policy Palace. After submitting to Sword's Gate, these 3 forces now had 2 sovereigns. Compared to the other forces, they were instantly much stronger. And this was all thanks to Sword's Gate. Because of the successful breakthrough, the 5 of them were very excited. Of course, this kind of excitement was understandable. After all, the Emperor Realm was really the ultimate goal for cultivators in the Great Thousand World. After all, before the Great Thousand World was connected to other universes, the Emperor Realm was the ultimate dream of all cultivators, and it was also the existence that stood at the top of all cultivators. Who didn't want to become an Emperor Realm Master in this life? However, a venerable sovereign was like a chasm that blocked everyone's path. After all, only a few people were able to cross this chasm. Now that Xianyuan Ling and the other 4 had finally crossed this chasm and fulfilled their ultimate dream, it was naturally exciting. Not only the 5 of them, but everyone in the Sword Sect was also celebrating. After all, the Sword Sect's strength had become even stronger. 4 emperors in a single sect, what kind of concept was this? It was probably something that they wouldn't have dared to imagine before. However, while everyone in the Sword Sect was celebrating, Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the others were already preparing to leave. They had already done what they needed to do. According to the current situation of the Great Thousand World, there shouldn't be any problems with the Sword Sect's strength. Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the others obviously couldn't stay here for long. But when it came to leaving, the person who was the most unwilling was undoubtedly Mu Jun. Lin Yun was still in seclusion in the Source Land, and Mu Jun was naturally reluctant to leave at this time. I want to stay in the Great Thousand World. Mu Jun looked at Gong Nantian and said seriously. Hearing this, Gong Nantian couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. How could he leave Mu Jun alone in the Great Thousand World? If anything happened to Mu Jun, Gong Nantian had no doubt that Mu Lingxian would definitely skin him alive. Therefore, Gong Nantian refused without hesitation. Young master, don't make things difficult for me. It was definitely impossible to leave Mu Jun alone in the Great Thousand World. Hearing this, Mu Jun's face darkened and he was somewhat displeased. Gong Nantian also said helplessly at this time, Young master, the days ahead are still long, and Xiao Chen will definitely come to the Hong Meng world in the future. When that time comes, won't it be more convenient for you to do whatever you want in the Hong Meng world? It wasn't easy to persuade Mu Jun. Furthermore, Gong Nantian promised that he would definitely invite Xiao Chen to the Hong Meng world to be his driver in the future. Only then did Mu Jun agree. After confirming that he was leaving, Mu Jun naturally paid a visit to Xiao Qing and Bai Rue to bid farewell to them. However, after the two elders understood what had happened, their attitude towards Mu Jun changed obviously. How should he put it? It was a little awkward. After all, with the two elders' personalities, it was obvious that they couldn't accept such a thing between two men. Therefore, they were more guarded against Mu Jun. That night, Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the other three elders told Xian Yuan Ling and the others that they were leaving. After knowing that Lin Yuan and the others were leaving, Xian Yuan Ling, Long Qing, and Song Xing personally went to the cave residence where Gong Nantian and the others were staying. Everyone sat together to drink and chat. It was also considered a farewell for Gong Nantian and the others. Senior, why are you in such a hurry to leave? Aren't you waiting for third brother to come out of seclusion? During the banquet, Xian Yuan Ling tried to persuade them to stay. After all, Xiao Qin was still in seclusion, and there was no way for him to come out. Hearing this, Gong Nantian smiled and said, It's fine. We've stayed in the Great Thousand World for quite some time, and it's time for us to go back. As for Xiao Qin, just let him know when he comes out of seclusion. In addition, let him come to the Hong Meng world when he has time. After all, we're considered acquaintances. Gong Nantian didn't care about this. It didn't matter whether Xiao Qin was there or not. After all, Gong Nantian knew that Xiao Qin should be in a critical period now. He hadn't come out of seclusion for such a long time, and it was probably because he had obtained the recognition of the origin energy. At this time, it was better not to disturb him. Moreover, it wasn't as if they couldn't meet in the future. After Xiao Qin came out of seclusion and stabilized the situation in the Great Thousand World, he could go to the Hong Meng world. At that time, they would be able to meet again. Hearing Gong Nantian's words, Xian Yuan Ling was helpless. However, he still raised the cup in his hand and said sincerely, I don't know what to say, but thank you for your kindness in teaching me. In the future, I will definitely visit you in the Hong Meng world. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 25-20. Xian Yuan Ling was naturally very respectful to Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the others. After all, without their guidance, Xian Yuan Ling and the others would not have been able to break through to the Emperor realm. In the face of Xian Yuan Ling's gratitude, Gong Nantian waved his hand indifferently. It's a small matter, don't worry about it. Gong Nantian indeed did not care about helping Xian Yuan Ling and the other sovereigns. Moreover, although those pills were extremely precious in the Great Thousand World and could even be said to be priceless, in the eyes of Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace, they were not too rare. After all, they were not pills for breaking through to the Ancestor realm. Gong Nantian did not care about these things. After expressing his gratitude, Mu Jun came to Xian Yuan Ling's side and said reluctantly, Xian Yuan Ling, when baby Xiao Qin comes out, you must tell him to find me in the Hong Meng world. Mu Jun was absolutely unwilling to leave the Great Thousand World, but he had no choice. Gong Nantian would definitely not leave him here alone. Looking at Mu Jun's reluctant expression, Xianyuan Ling nodded with a strange expression and sighed helplessly in his heart. Third brother, take care of yourself. This guy probably won't let you go. After the banquet, everyone drank to their heart's content. Only Mu Jun was walking around in a daze. Of course, it was for Xiaochen. After a silent night, early the next morning, Xianyuan Ling and the others personally sent Gong Nantian and the others off. Xianyuan Ling, you must remember to tell Xiaochen that I will wait for him in the Hongmeng world, Mu Jun reminded again. Don't worry, I will. Brother Xianyuan, see you in the future. If there is a chance, you three siblings can come to my world to play, Lin Feng and his sister said. Of course, Xianyuan Ling said with a smile. After bidding farewell to everyone, Gong Nantian and the others left. There was nothing to worry about in the Great Thousand World now. Unless there was a situation where other universes directly intervened, there was no force in the Great Thousand World that could threaten the Sword Sect. Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace would naturally not sit by and do nothing about other universes. Even if Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace did not take action, the Righteous Alliance in the Origin World would probably take action. Moreover, Gong Nantian had paid special attention to Jun Wuya last night and discovered that Jun Wuya should have no problem breaking through to the Ancestor Realm. It was just a matter of time. Therefore, he was even more relieved. After sending off Gong Nantian and the others, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and Li Chun also prepared to leave. After all, they had broken through to the Emperor Realm, so it was time for them to return. Moreover, Dao Xiong and Luo Xing were probably waiting anxiously for them. Xianyuan Ling and the others didn't say much about the trio's departure. Although Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao and Li Chun had made breakthroughs and the Saber Sect, Moon Palace and Heavenly Policy Mansion now had two emperors, they still posed no threat to the Sword Sect. Don't forget that Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing were also emperors now, while the Sword Sect already had 4 emperors. Therefore, the biggest winner this time was undoubtedly the Sword Sect. Moreover, in addition to Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, the strength of Tsang Xing and the others had also improved a lot. Even many of the Sword Sect's disciples had made successive breakthroughs during this period. It could be said that the current Sword Sect was much stronger than before. In this way, even if Dao Ju and the others had broken through to the Emperor Realm, not only would they not dare to have any thoughts about the Sword Sect, they would even be more respectful to them. The Sword Sect's strength was truly enough to suppress all the great forces in the Great Thousand World. Moreover, Jun Wuya had not made a breakthrough yet. Once Jun Wuya broke through to the Ancestor Realm, the Sword Sect's position as the overlord of the Great Thousand World would be unshakable. Of course, the Sword Sect had not revealed its fangs yet because Xiao Chen was still cultivating in the Source Land. Everything would have to wait for Xiao Chen to return before making any plans. After sending off Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and Li Chun, Xianyuan Ling and the others returned to the main hall. At this moment, Tsang Xing's expression changed slightly. Everyone, there's news that Mu Tianshan hasn't been very obedient recently. Mu Tianshan had secretly contacted many great forces. There was no such thing as a wall that didn't have a crack. This news naturally reached the ears of the Sword Sect. Other than the fact that they didn't know about Hermit Mo and the others, the Sword Sect already knew about the other great forces that Mu Tianshan had contacted. They didn't mention it before, but now that Gong Nantian and the others had left, Tsang Xing felt that it was time to give Mu Tianshan a warning. Hearing Gong Nantian's words, everyone present wasn't too nervous. Everyone didn't think that Mu Tianshan was a threat to the Sword Sect now. Of course, this was under the condition that they didn't know about Hermit Mo and the others. If everyone knew that Mu Tianshan had advanced by leaps and bounds with the help of Hermit Mo and the others, and that Yunchern had even broken through to the Ancestor Realm, they probably wouldn't be so relaxed. Mu Tianshan is indeed acting recklessly. Why don't we use them as a warning to others? Nangong Guan was the first to speak. Ever since the battle between the good and evil paths had ended, although all the great forces knew that the Sword Sect had become the overlord of the Great Thousand World, the Sword Sect hadn't deliberately displayed its authority. It wasn't because they didn't want to, but because there were many things that needed to be dealt with after the battle between the good and evil paths had ended. Furthermore, Nangong Guan and the other three had helped the Sword Sect to increase its strength. Therefore, the Sword Sect didn't have the time to deal with these matters. Naturally, some people who seemed to have submitted to the Sword Sect on the surface were actually dissatisfied with the Sword Sect on the inside. Now, the time was about right. Gong Nan Tian and the other three had left, and the Sword Sect's strength had successfully leaped to a new level. The remaining trivial matters were more or less settled, and they could free up their hands to teach Mu Tian Shan a lesson. Therefore, no one objected to Nangong Guan's suggestion, but in the end, the decision still depended on Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing's opinion. The two of them were Xiao Chen's sworn brother and sister, and their status was extraordinary. Moreover, they had both broken through to the Emperor realm. Xiao Chen and Jun Weao weren't here, so the two of them were the ones with the highest cultivations in the Sword Sect. Therefore, the final decision was naturally made by the two of them. Facing everyone's gazes, Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing looked at each other before Xianyuan Ling spoke. Mu Tian Shan indeed needs to be dealt with, but how should we control it? Should we teach them a lesson, or should we directly destroy them? That goes without saying. Of course, we're going to destroy them, Zhou Song said immediately. Directly destroying Mu Tianshan was the unanimous opinion of everyone. After all, the Sword Sect didn't have the slightest good impression of Mu Tianshan. Now that they wanted to kill the chicken to warn the monkeys, if they didn't kill the chicken directly, how could it serve as a warning? Therefore, Mu Tianshan had to be destroyed, and they had to do it without holding back. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 25-21. Everyone was discussing Mu Tianshan's matters. Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Song Xing, and the rest of the Sword Sect's upper echelons didn't take Mu Tianshan's actions seriously. Everyone was discussing Mu Tianshan's matters. Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Song Xing, and the rest of the Sword Sect's upper echelons didn't take Mu Tianshan's actions seriously. To put it bluntly, in the eyes of the Sword Sect, Mu Tianshan was like a clown that could be destroyed at any time. Now that many things had been settled, Gong Nan Tian, Lin Yuan, and the rest had left one after another. The Sword Sect could finally free up their hand. Since Mu Tianshan was so happy, the Sword Sect could only kill the chicken to warn the monkey. Everyone agreed to destroy Mu Tianshan. However, Wu Huan said, "Are there any other Ling Tian sects like Mu Tianshan?" Mu Tianshan was obviously unwilling to submit to the Sword Sect. That was why he did all these things behind the scenes. He wanted to contact and rope in other forces to oppose the Sword Sect together. However, other than Mu Tianshan, what about the other Ling Tian sects? Hearing Wu Huan's words, Song Xing shook his head and said, "The other sects didn't make any moves. They didn't express their allegiance, but they were very honest. Currently, only Saber Sect, Heavenly Policy Palace, and Moon Palace expressed their willingness to submit to the Sword Sect. The other Ling Tian sects didn't say anything. However, even if they didn't express their willingness to submit to the Sword Sect, the other Ling Tian sects didn't make any moves behind the scenes. They were all very quiet and honest." Hearing this, Wu Huan didn't say much. It seemed that they only needed to deal with Mu Tianshan. After dealing with Mu Tianshan, the other Ling Tian sects should know what to do. In fact, the Sword Sect didn't need to make a show of force. This time, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and Li Chun all broke through to the Emperor realm. This result already made the other sects jealous. The reason why Dao Ju and the others could break through to the Emperor realm was undoubtedly because of Gong Nan Tian's help. As for why Gong Nantian and the others chose to help them, it was because of the Sword Sect. The three great sects had just said that they were willing to submit to the Emperor Realm. Sword Sect had 3 Emperor Realm Masters. This could be considered as a report to the 3 great sects. In this regard, many forces were naturally envious. After all, what did a sect with 2 sovereigns represent? It was a qualitative leap. In addition, the Sword Sect now had 4 emperors. No one knew when Junwuya would break through. If he did, the Sword Sect would be the only sect in the Great Thousand World to have an Ancestor Realm Master. Facing such a behemoth, which Great Thousand World force would dare to openly go against them? In the Great Thousand World, it seemed that no one dared to go against the Great Thousand World. However, was this really the case? Just as the Sword Sect was discussing the matter of Mu Tianshan, on the other side, Yuntiani, Yunchen, and his son, as well as the higher-ups of Mu Tianshan gathered together in the main hall of Mu Tianshan. They were also discussing how to deal with the Sword Sect. Mu Tianshan's strength was no longer the same as before. Yunchen had even broken through to the Ancestor Realm. As such, Mu Tianshan was naturally full of confidence. He always felt that he could compete with the Sword Sect. Sitting on the main seat, Yunchen looked indifferently at the crowd below and said, "Everyone, do you think that we should start a war with the Sword Sect?" After breaking through to the Ancestor Realm, Yunchen had become a little arrogant. Looking at his current appearance, it was obvious that he did not take anyone seriously. It was as if he was the only existence in the entire Great Thousand World. As soon as they received the news that Lin Yuan, Gong Nantian, and the rest had left, Yunchen and Yuntiani could not wait to discuss the matter of starting a war with the Sword Sect. Upon hearing Yunchen's words, Yuntiani was the first to speak. "Father, I think we should choose to start a war immediately. Now that Junwuya has not broken through to the Ancestor Realm, and Father is already an Ancestor Realm Master, if we start a war with the Sword Sect now, we will definitely win." Indeed, there was no news of Junwuya coming out of seclusion, but Yunchen's Ancestor Realm was not the real Ancestor Realm. Yunchen and Junwuya's situations were completely different. Junwuya relied entirely on his own strength to break through to the Ancestor Realm, unlike Yunchen, who was completely at the fake Ancestor Realm and was even inferior to Xietian. However, Yunchen and Yuntiani naturally did not know about this. At this moment, they only felt that dealing with the Sword Sect was already in the bag. Hearing Yuntiani's words, Yunchen nodded slightly, his eyes filled with confidence. He really did not know where the father and son's confidence came from. Although Yuntiani's cultivation was already at the Great Emperor Realm, his cultivation was not stable. After all, he did not obtain this strength through his own efforts. Everything was like the moon in the water. Yunchen agreed to Yuntiani's request, and the Ancestor Realm Masters of Mu Tian Mountain also nodded in agreement. They had also improved a lot with the help of Mo and the other 2, and their strength had increased by leaps and bounds. At this moment, all of them were extremely confident. The Sword Sect had yet to make a move on Mu Tian Mountain, but Mu Tian Mountain had already decided to go to war with the Sword Sect. Seeing that no one objected, Yunchen said loudly, "In that case, let's go to war with the Sword Sect. In addition, this king will hold a banquet 3 days later and invite all the great forces to attend to discuss the crusade against the Sword Sect." After Gong Nantian, Lin Yuan, and the other 2 left, Yunchen thought that he was already the overlord of the Great Thousand World. Moreover, as long as he revealed that he had broken through to the Ancestor Realm, all the great forces would know what to do. After all, the Sword Sect did not have an Ancestor Realm Master yet, but his Mu Tian Mountain already had an Ancestor Realm Master. On this day, there was a terrifying pressure that soared into the sky above Mu Tian Mountain. This pressure had faintly surpassed the level of an Emperor Realm Master, and it looked extremely frightening. Needless to say, this pressure obviously came from Yunchen. He wanted to tell the world that he had broken through to the ancestor realm and remind them what they should do. The pressure that appeared above Mu Tian Mountain naturally attracted the attention of many great forces. However, what was even more unexpected was that on that day, Mu Tian Mountain actually declared war on the Sword Sect and even listed the various crimes of the Sword Sect. Of course, these crimes were all nonsense. If you want to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext. To put it bluntly, it was just looking for an excuse. Not only did he directly declare war on the Sword Sect, Mu Tian Mountain also invited all the great forces of the Great Thousand World to gather at Mu Tian Mountain 3 days later. It was said to be a celebration of Yun Chen's breakthrough to the ancestor realm, but in reality, everyone knew that Mu Tian Mountain was forcing many great forces to choose a side. Those who would come would obviously be from Mu Tian Mountain's camp, and those who would not come would be from the Sword Sect's camp. It could be said that Mu Tian Mountain's actions this time were extremely high-profile. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of this chapter. Chapter 25-22. Mu Tian Mountain had declared war on the Sword Sect and Yun Chen had successfully broken through to the ancestor realm. The entire Great Thousand World was in an uproar when these two pieces of news came out. The war between good and evil had finally ended and peace had been restored. Was it going to be turbulent again? Moreover, how was it possible for Yun Chen to break through to the ancestor realm? Even Junwei had yet to break through to the ancestor realm, so how could Yun Chen break through to the ancestor realm so quickly? However, the terrifying pressure above Mu Tian Mountain told everyone that Mu Tian Mountain wasn't lying. Yun Chen had indeed broken through to the ancestor realm. The aftermath of the war between good and evil had yet to completely calm down, and the war between Mu Tian Mountain and the Sword Sect was about to erupt again. For a moment, many cultivators in the Great Thousand World felt bitter in their hearts. They couldn't help but sigh. Mu Tian Mountain's high-profile declaration of war and the banquet he had invited masters from all over the Great Thousand World shocked all the major forces. However, not many forces chose to respond. Most of them chose to watch coldly from the sidelines. After all, the Sword Sect hadn't responded yet. They wanted to see what the Sword Sect's attitude was. After all, if Yun Chen had really broken through to the ancestor realm and Junwei hadn't, the Sword Sect would be in danger. Although the Sword Sect had more Emperor Realm Masters, it was useless. In front of an ancestor realm master, it was meaningless. The world was waiting for the Sword Sect's response. Whether they would admit defeat or accept the challenge, the Sword Sect's attitude would directly determine the direction of the entire matter. Countless gazes fell on the Sword Sect and Mu Tian Mountain. At this moment, in the main hall of the Sword Sect, Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Song Xing, and the other higher-ups of the Sword Sect had also gathered. However, this time, everyone's expression was extremely ugly. Mu Tian Mountain is simply courting death. He actually dares to openly declare war. Without further ado, destroy him. Wu Huan's expression was gloomy as he spoke first. Initially, they had already planned to destroy Mu Tianshan. However, before the Sword Sect could make a move, Mu Tianshan had already declared war. Moreover, he had done it in such a high-profile manner. It was as if he didn't care about the Sword Sect at all. What was even worse was that Mu Tianshan was actually holding a banquet 3 days later and inviting the various forces of the Great Thousand World to celebrate Yun Chen's breakthrough. However, even an idiot could tell that Mu Tianshan had an ulterior motive. The banquet 3 days later had nothing to do with Yun Chen's breakthrough. To put it bluntly, the banquet 3 days later was to discuss how to take down the Sword Sect. Everything was for the sake of the Sword Sect. Wu Huan was infuriated. Of course, the others were also filled with murderous intent. Mu Tianshan was indeed courting death. Furthermore, it was obvious that he had planned this beforehand. Gong Nantian and the others had just left and he had declared war in such a high-profile manner. Who would believe that this wasn't premeditated? However, although they were angry, the people of the Sword Sect were still unsure whether Yunchen had really broken through to the ancestor state. If Yunchen had really broken through, things would indeed be somewhat troublesome. After all, Jun Wuya hadn't been able to break through to the ancestor state. Don't be anxious. Yunchen's matter is the key. If Yunchen's breakthrough was just a boast from Mu Tianshan, the Sword Sect would naturally be able to easily destroy Mu Tianshan. However, if Yunchen has really broken through to the ancestor state, the situation would be different, said Nangongguan. The key problem was still Yunchen. Upon hearing Nangongguan's words, Wu Huan added, "He wants to break through to the ancestor state? Even Master hasn't broken through to the ancestor state. How can this guy break through? Eldest senior brother, there's no need to think about it. This must be a boast from Mu Tianshan. His goal is to rope in other forces." Wu Huan didn't believe that Yunchen could break through to the ancestor state. It simply didn't make sense. However, Nangongguan clearly had to be more cautious about this. She turned to look at Song Xing. Song Xing, has there been any news about Mu Tianshan's situation? Mu Tianshan's current situation wasn't very clear. The Sword Sect naturally sent people to investigate immediately. Upon hearing Nangongguan's words, Song Xing nodded slightly and said, "The first batch of news has already been sent back." "What do you mean? Has Yunchen broken through to the ancestor state?" Zhou Song and the others asked one by one. Whether Yunchen had really broken through or not was very important to the Sword Sect, because if Yunchen's breakthrough was fake, then the Sword Sect could easily crush Mu Tianshan. However, if Yunchen had really broken through to the ancestor realm, then the Sword Sect would be in trouble. Faced with everyone's questioning, Song Xing sighed helplessly and then said the result that everyone didn't want to see the most. "Although our people weren't able to enter Mu Tianshan, there is indeed a pressure above Mu Tianshan that surpasses the Emperor realm, as the rumors say. It should be from Yunchen. Based on the current situation, the possibility of Yunchen breaking through to the ancestor realm was as high as 80%. Regarding this, everyone's expression changed slightly. They thought to themselves, could it be that Yunchen really broke through to the ancestor realm? But it shouldn't be. This guy was only an Emperor realm master before. Even the old ancestor hadn't broken through to the ancestor realm, so how did Yunchen break through? Jun Wuya and Yunchen's methods of breaking through to the ancestor realm were completely different, so there was naturally no comparison. However, the people of the Sword Sect didn't know about this. Now, all the signs indicated that Yunchen's breakthrough wasn't a bluff from Mu Tianshan. If that was the case, then this battle would be a little difficult. Although the Sword Sect had the advantage in other aspects, what about Yunchen? Who would deal with him? Seeing the change in everyone's expression, Song Xing sighed softly and said, "The situation is indeed a little tricky. Unfortunately, the sect master isn't here right now and we can't contact him. We can only rely on ourselves." Xiao Qin was still in the Source Land and they couldn't contact him at all. This made Song Xing and the others feel like they were a group of dragons without a leader. They empathized with Song Xing's words. However, at this moment, Xianyuan Ling spoke resolutely, "Accept the challenge. No matter what the situation of Mu Tianshan is now, we don't have to care because our Sword Sect won't admit defeat, let alone retreat. So, we can only accept the challenge." Xianyuan Ling directly chose to accept the challenge. There was no need to care about the situation of Mu Tianshan. Even if Yunchen broke through to the ancestor realm, so what? My Sword Sect still wants to fight. Hearing Xianyuan Ling's words, everyone present was stunned. They then looked at each other and nodded heavily. Xianyuan Ling was right. Why bother with the situation of Mu Tianshan? What did Yunchen's breakthrough have to do with the Sword Sect? Could it be that if Yunchen really broke through to the ancestor realm, the Sword Sect would have to bow down to them? That was obviously impossible. So, no matter what the situation was, no matter what the situation of Mu Tianshan was, the Sword Sect only had one choice, and that was to accept the challenge and not retreat. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 25-23. Whether Yunchen broke through or not had nothing to do with the Sword Sect. Even if Yunchen really broke through to the ancestor state, would the Sword Sect be weak? Or would they submit to Mu Tian Mountain? Upon hearing Xian Yuanling's words, everyone nodded. Wu Huan said excitedly, "That's right. Who cares what Yunchen's situation is now? Let's fight." No one objected to Xian Yuanling's words. They would fight. Seeing this, Xian Yuanling said, "Then let's fight. However, don't be in a hurry to fight. I want to see who will go to Mu Tian Mountain in 3 days." Mu Tian Mountain announced that they would hold a banquet in 3 days to celebrate Yunchen's breakthrough. Xian Yuanling wanted to see who would go to the Great Thousand World. To put it bluntly, the banquet that would be held 3 days later would be a time for them to choose between Swords Gate and Mu Tian Mountain. It would be a time for them to make a decision. If they chose to go to the banquet, they would undoubtedly choose Mu Tian Mountain. If they did not go, they would choose to stand on the Sword Sect's side. They could make use of Mu Tian Mountain's opportunity to take over the Great Thousand World and establish the Sword Sect's position as the overlord. The outcome would depend on this battle. Xian Yuanling and the rest made their decision. Soon, the Sword Sect responded strongly to Mu Tian Mountain's declaration of war. If they wanted to fight, they would fight. They had no intention of backing down. Even if Yunchen had broken through to the ancestor state, the Sword Sect was still so strong. They did not give Mu Tian Mountain any face and did not leave any way out for themselves. The Sword Sect's response was firm. Following the Sword Sect's response, the various forces in the Great Thousand World knew that the rare peace was about to be broken. This time, they were betting on the battle for the throne of the Great Thousand World. Regardless of whether it was the Sword Sect or Mu Tian Mountain, whoever won would become the true overlord of the Great Thousand World. However, Mu Tianshan probably didn't expect that they had already lost the battle right from the start. Because regardless of whether they won or lost, Mu Tianshan's fate was already sealed. He was definitely going to die. The two superpowers wanted to fight for the position of the overlord of the vast thousand domains. At the same time, they did not seem to want to fight alone. Instead, they wanted to force the other superpowers to choose a side before the battle began. On one hand, it was because Mu Tian Mountain was holding a banquet 3 days later. On the other hand, it was because the Sword Sect had no intention of participating. The Sword Sect didn't make a move immediately. Everyone knew that the Sword Sect wanted to see which powers would return to Mount Mu's banquet. Needless to say, those powers that chose to participate would become the Sword Sect's enemies. Once the Sword Sect won, their fates would be predictable. It was the same for those who chose the Swords Gate. If Mu Tian Mountain won in the end, they would have no way out either. However, what was shocking was that after the Sword Sect responded, the Saber Sect, Moon Palace, and Heavenly Policy Palace also expressed their willingness to listen to the Sword Sect's orders. These three superpowers didn't choose to remain silent. Instead, they stood firmly on the side of the Sword Sect. In the face of these three superpowers, there was probably no superpower in the vast thousand domains that dared to ignore them. After all, the situation in the vast thousand domains had changed drastically. The Sword Sect and Mu Tian Mountain had both risen against the heavens. However, the strength of the Saber Sect, Moon Palace, and Heavenly Policy Palace could not be underestimated. In addition, this time Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and Li Chun had broken through to the Emperor realm. These three superpowers had two emperors. In front of such strength, no superpower dared to ignore them. The voices of the Saber Sect, Moon Palace, and Heavenly Policy Palace made the atmosphere extremely tense because Mu Tian Mountain still didn't have the slightest intention of backing down. In an instant, the entire vast 1,000 domains was once again shrouded in fighting spirit. It was really an eventful period. The war between the good and evil paths had just ended and the rare period of peace was gone in the blink of an eye. In an instant, the vast 1,000 domains was about to welcome another war, a war that would determine the direction of the vast 1,000 domains. The Sword Sect was already prepared for war. However, Xianyuan Ling and the other higher-ups of the Sword Sect had been waiting for the banquet that would be held in 3 days. At this moment, in Xianyuan Ling's residence, everyone was gathered together and chatting while drinking tea. How many people do you think will attend the banquet at Mu Tian Mountain? Wu Huan asked. Hearing this, Zhang Xing said calmly, there should be some people. There will definitely be people who will go and there will be quite a few of them. After all, many people are best at taking advantage of the situation. Now that Yunchun has broken through to the ancestor state, many people think that the Sword Sect has no chance of winning, Xianyuan Ling said with a smile. On the surface, Mu Tian Mountain did have a higher chance of winning. After all, Yunchun had broken through to the ancestor state and Mu Tian Mountain didn't seem to be able to deal with Yunchun alone. If they couldn't deal with Yunchun, the Sword Sect would definitely lose this battle. Therefore, many people thought more highly of Mu Tian Mountain. In this way, the banquet at Mu Tian Mountain would probably be very lively. However, it didn't matter. Xianyuan Ling just wanted to see who exactly chose Mu Tian Mountain so that he could settle the score one by one in the future. As for the outcome of the battle, Xianyuan Ling could only say that he would do his best. No matter what, they had to fight. Even if the Sword Sect chose to submit, would Mu Tian Mountain let the Sword Sect off? It was obviously impossible. From the moment Mu Tian Mountain declared war, only one of the Sword Sect and Mu Tian Mountain could survive. Everyone knew that a mountain couldn't accommodate 2 tigers. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Early in the morning, Mu Tian Mountain became lively. Just as Xianyuan Ling had guessed, there were indeed many forces that chose Mu Tian Mountain. These people felt that the Sword Sect couldn't do anything to Yunchun since he had broken through to the ancestor state. They were certain that the Sword Sect would lose, so they directly threw themselves into Mu Tian Mountain's arms. Since early in the morning, people had arrived one after another. These people were from the various major forces in the Great Thousand World. Of course, there were also many powerful people who were independent cultivators. As the sect leader of Mu Tian Mountain, Yun Tianyi also put on a show and personally welcomed them. Seeing that so many people had chosen Mu Tian Mountain, the smile on Yun Tianyi's face became even wider. Looking at the lively Mu Tian Mountain, Yun Tianyi was secretly delighted. Shao Chen, oh Shao Chen, what do you have to fight with me now? See, so many people don't think that the Sword Sect will win this time. Mu Tian Mountain will definitely win this time. When the time comes, I will personally kill you. The change in the situation made Yun Tianyi extremely confident and excited. It was as if he could already see the moment of victory. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 25-24. More people came to attend the banquet than he had imagined, which made Yun Tianyi very happy. Sensing the extraordinarily lively atmosphere of the entire Mu Tian Mountain, Yun Tianyi felt as though he had succeeded and the Mu Tian Mountain was already the overlord of the Great Thousand World. Sect Master Yun, congratulations on breaking through to the Ancestor Realm. Sect Master Yun, Mu Tian Mountain will definitely be the leader of the Great Thousand World in the future. Once again, we congratulate you in advance. Everyone who came to attend the banquet congratulated Yun Tianyi with a smile, and Yun Tianyi responded with a smile. Haha, with everyone's support, Mu Tian Mountain will naturally not disappoint everyone. We will definitely enjoy glory and wealth together in the future. Yun Tianyi was indeed a little proud. After all, Mu Tian Mountain had never been like this before. It was as if all the major forces in the Great Thousand World had come to curry favor with Mu Tian Mountain, which made Yun Tianyi feel very comfortable. At noon, almost everyone who came to attend the banquet had arrived. Yun Tianyi then went to Yun Chen's residence and saw Yun Chen drinking tea in the courtyard. Seeing Yun Tianyi walk over, Yun Chen smiled and said, "How is it, Master? It's better than we thought. It seems that the sword sect is indeed powerless to reverse the situation," Yun Tianyi said with a smile. Needless to say, Yun Tianyi was indeed full of confidence at this moment. However, Yun Chen was more cautious and did not rejoice because of Yun Tianyi's words. Instead, he said calmly, "Tianyi, don't be complacent at any time. At least before everything is settled, no one can tell what the outcome will be." Yun Tianyi softly reprimanded Yun Tianyi. Yun Tianyi nodded his head in response. Seeing this, Yun Chen also stood up and said, "Let's go. Since he has chosen my Mu Tian Mountain, I cannot be too rude." The banquet was held directly in the main hall of Mu Tian Mountain. At this moment, there was already a hubbub of voices. Many experts who came to attend the banquet were drinking and chatting. After weighing the pros and cons, they had all chosen Mu Tian Mountain. On a certain level, they would be in the same camp in the future. Therefore, the distance between everyone was much closer. As the banquet continued, the atmosphere became more and more intense. At this moment, Yun Chen and Yun Tianyi finally appeared. Seeing Yun Chen personally appeared, everyone present was extremely excited. Why did they choose to join Mu Tian Mountain? Wasn't it all for Yun Chen? Because Yun Chen had broken through to the ancestor realm, they had chosen Mu Tian Mountain over the sword sect, and not the sword sect. Therefore, Yun Chen's appearance had undoubtedly given everyone a boost of confidence and made them even more confident. Moreover, in order to achieve a better result, not only did Yun Chen not conceal his aura, he even intentionally revealed his strength. An aura that faintly surpassed the Emperor realm was faintly discernible, enveloping the entire Mu Tian Mountain. Feeling this aura, the hearts of everyone present calmed down. As expected, Yun Chen really has broken through into the progenitor realm. In this way, their choice was correct because the sword sect still didn't have a progenitor realm expert. No one knew how Yun Chen had broken through to the ancestor realm. After all, Jun Wuya hadn't broken through yet. However, regardless of how Yun Chen had done it, it was a fact that he was now an ancestor realm expert. No one could refute that. With a faint smile on his face, Yun Chen came to the main seat and took a seat. Then, he swept his gaze across everyone present and said indifferently, "This king thanks everyone for coming. Today we won't talk about anything else but romance. Moreover, since everyone has chosen my Mu Tian Mountain, this king can also promise everyone that my Mu Tian Mountain will definitely enjoy glory and splendor with everyone present in the future." Yun Chen's words caused the atmosphere to reach its peak. This was Yun Chen's promise, and what everyone present wanted was this sentence from Yun Chen. Immediately, everyone raised the wine cup in their hands and congratulated Yun Chen in unison. Old ancestor Yun is mighty. Facing the congratulations and praise of so many people, even Yun Chen couldn't help but feel a little lightheaded. However, Yun Chen was ultimately much calmer than Yun Tianyi. Therefore, although he felt comfortable in his heart, he didn't show it on the surface. He remained calm and indifferent as he raised his wine cup and said to everyone, "Come, everyone, let's drink up." With that, Yun Chen took the initiative to drink all the wine in his cup. Seeing this, the others naturally didn't want to fall behind. In an instant, the atmosphere of the banquet was completely heated up. Naturally, the situation at Mu Tian Mountain couldn't be hidden from the sword sect. They knew that many forces had sided with Mu Tian Mountain. At the same time, the sword sect was also very lively. This was because today was also the day of the sword sect's banquet. It was set on the same day as Mu Tian Mountain, and there were also many forces present. However, compared to Mu Tian Mountain, there were fewer forces present. Currently, the entire Great Thousand World was divided into 3 factions. One faction supported Mu Tian Mountain, one faction supported the Sword Sect, and one faction remained neutral. The Sword Sect had chosen to hold the banquet on the same day as Mu Tian Mountain. The meaning behind this was self-evident. The Saber Sect, Moon Palace, and Heavenly Policy Mansion were naturally present. Moreover, Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, and Luo Xing were present personally. At this moment, the main hall of the Sword Sect was also very lively. However, at the main table, although Dao Xiong and the others were drinking heartily, they were privately discussing the upcoming battle. After drinking a cup of wine, Dao Xiong looked at Song Xing and asked, "Song Xing, is there still no news of Xiaochen?" There was a trace of worry between his brows. The Saber Sect, Heavenly Policy Mansion, and Moon Palace were obviously completely tied to the Sword Sect. Both parties were basically in the same boat. Hearing Dao Xiong's words, Song Xing shook his head and said, "The sect leader is in seclusion and there is no news until now. Xiao Chun came from the land of origin. Even if Song Xing wanted to contact him, he could not." Dao Xiong muttered to himself, "This is a little troublesome." He was actually not confident. After all, Yun Chun had broken through to the ancestor state. Not only Song Xing, but the others present were also extremely worried. This was because everyone knew that no one in the Sword Sect could stop Yun Chun. Once no one could stop Yun Chun, regardless of the process, Mu Tian Mountain would definitely win in the end. There was no doubt about that. Many people were still discussing softly and expressed their worries about the future of the Sword Sect. However, in this somewhat strange atmosphere, a space crack appeared in the middle of the main hall. Then, Xiao Chen, who was dressed in white, slowly walked out. Looking at the crowded main hall, Xiao Chen said with a smile, "What day is it today? Why is my Sword Sect so lively? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 25-25. Xiao Chen's sudden appearance stunned everyone present. Previously, everyone was still saying that there was no news of Xiao Chen. Who would have thought that Xiao Chen would appear in the next second? Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling were the first to regain their senses. They looked at Xiao Chen in surprise. Long Qing said in surprise, "Little brother, you've come out of seclusion?" Previously, they had tried to contact Xiao Chen but there had been no response. Now that they saw Xiao Chen, Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling were naturally very excited. Hearing Long Qing's words, Xiao Chen smiled and nodded. "Yes." Then, Xiao Chen was led to the main table by everyone. When they saw Xiao Chen again, even Dao Xiong and Li Xiao could not see through Xiao Chen's cultivation. After a few months, even Dao Xiong and the others could not sense Xiao Chen's cultivation. This made everyone secretly shocked. They thought to themselves, perhaps Xiao Chen's cultivation has increased by a lot again? Everyone bowed. Xiao Chen's return was like a shot of adrenaline to everyone, making them feel much more at ease. This was especially so for those who had chosen the Sword Sect. Previously, they were not optimistic about the Sword Sect. However, Xiao Chen's appearance seemed to have given them confidence. After taking his seat, Xiao Chen smiled and said to Dao Xiong and the other two, "Thank you, 3 seniors." Xiao Chen had also heard about the matters in the Great Thousand World. He knew that Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, and Luo Xing had helped him a lot and had always stood firmly on the side of the Sword Sect. This made Xiao Chen feel very gratified. In the face of Xiao Chen's gratitude, Dao Xiong took the lead and said, "This is nothing. We are in the same boat. You can't expect us to join Mu Tian Mountain." Dao Xiong's words were still the same as before. He did not care about anything at all. In response, Xiao Chen smiled and did not say much. Xiao Chen already understood the situation in the Great Thousand World. He originally thought that with the sword sect's current strength, no one would dare to jump out and seek death. However, he did not expect Mu Tianshan to actually jump out and do it in such a high-profile manner. Mu Tian Mountain's patriarch Yunchun had broken through to the ancestor realm. This was probably the source of Mu Tian Mountain's confidence. However, this confidence was no different from a joke in Xiao Chen's eyes. How could it be so easy to break through to the ancestor realm? Even Junwuya had yet to break through to the ancestor realm. Was it even possible for Yunchun to break through to the ancestor realm? He must have used some kind of shameful method to forcefully increase his cultivation. Just like Xie Tian in the past, he seemed to have an ancestor realm cultivation, but his strength was incomparably weak. Compared to a true ancestor realm expert, there was no comparison at all. Xiao Chen did not pay much attention to Mu Tianshan. In Xiao Chen's eyes, Mu Tianshan was just a bunch of clowns. However, the others did not think so. Previously, they were still talking about Yunchun breaking through to the ancestor realm. Now that Xiao Chen had returned, everyone naturally regarded him as their backbone. Therefore, Song Xing also spoke up. Sect Master Yunchun has broken through to the ancestor realm. The person that the sword sect was most worried about was Yunchun. After all, Yunchun had broken through to the ancestor realm. Moreover, according to various intelligence reports, it did not seem to be fake. However, before Song Xing could finish speaking, Xiao Chen interrupted him. With a faint smile on his face, Xiao Chen said indifferently, "What bullshit ancestor realm? Is Yunchun worthy of breaking through to the ancestor realm? Even Master has not broken through to the ancestor realm, so how can he? He probably used some kind of shameful method to break through, but he's only at the pseudo-ancestor realm." Xiao Chen did not take Yunchun seriously at all. Breaking through to the ancestor realm like this was no different from trash. Seeing that Xiao Chen was full of confidence, everyone in the hall was also full of confidence. Since Xiao Chen said that there would be no problem, they naturally believed him. A mere pseudo-ancestor realm was not worth mentioning. As soon as his voice fell, Xiao Chen looked at the people at the same table as him and said with a smile, "Don't worry, leave Yunchun to me. I'd like to see how strong he is as an ancestor realm expert." There was no need to alarm Junwuya at all. Currently, Junwuya should be at the critical moment of breaking through to the ancestor realm. It was obviously impossible for him to come out of seclusion at this time. Moreover, Xiao Chen was confident that he could defeat Yunchun. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, everyone looked at each other. Then, Dao Xiong asked curiously, "Xiao Chen, tell us honestly, what is your current cultivation level?" No one could see through Xiao Chen's cultivation level at all. Faced with Dao Xiong's question, Xiao Chen smiled and said, "You will know when the time comes." He was keeping them in suspense, and did not answer Dao Xiong's question directly. However, as soon as he said that, Xiao Chen took the initiative to raise his cup and say to everyone present, "Thank you for supporting the Sword Sect today. The Sword Sect will definitely not disappoint you. You only need to watch the battle with Mu Tian Mountain from the side. I believe that the Sword Sect will not disappoint you when the time comes." As soon as Xiao Chen said that, everyone present was stunned. What did that mean? The Sword Sect did not need them to take action? They wanted to fight against Mu Tian Mountain and the other forces by themselves? In fact, Mu Tian Mountain and the Sword Sect were now divided into two camps. When the battle started, everyone should take action. However, now, Xiao Chen did not need them to take action. He only needed the Sword Sect's power. It had to be said that Xiao Chen's words were indeed arrogant. However, that was also Xiao Chen's true thoughts. Rather than asking everyone present to take part in the battle, it was better for them to watch from the side and see how the Sword Sect defeated the forces of Mu Tian Mountain in one fell swoop. Since the Sword Sect wanted to become the overlord of the Great Thousand World, They had to show that they had the power to suppress everything. Otherwise, there would be many incidents like what happened to Mu Tian Mountain in the future. Xiao Chen wanted to make a name for the sword sect in one battle so that the various forces in the Great Thousand World would not dare to provoke the sword sect. At the same time, he wanted to tell everyone that the sword sect's power was enough to fight against the entire Great Thousand World. Even if all the forces combined, they would not be a match for the sword sect. He wanted to make those with ulterior motives fearful. Only then would he be able to control the Great Thousand World in the shortest time possible. Xiao Chen obviously did not have the time and energy to play with these people slowly. Hence, he chose the most direct method. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chen did not care about everyone's shock. He took the lead and drank all the wine in his cup. "Everyone, come, let's drink up." After drinking a cup of wine, Dao Ju looked at Xiao Chen in confusion. "Xiao Chen, are you really going to fight against Mu Tian Mountain alone? You don't need us to take action? They are just a bunch of useless people. Why do we have to make it so troublesome? We will just destroy Mu Tian Mountain tomorrow." Upon hearing that, Xiao Chen smiled. "Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 25-26. From Xiao Chen's point of view, Mu Tian Mountain was just a bunch of clowns. As for Yun Chen, breaking through to the ancestor realm was bullshit. Xiao Chen didn't care at all. If Yun Chen had broken through to the ancestor realm with his own strength, then Xiao Chen might think more highly of him, but obviously, Yun Chen didn't rely on his own strength to break through to the ancestor realm, so Xiao Chen naturally didn't care. Xiao Chen did not care about a person who gained power through shady means. He did not value such a person at all. To put it bluntly, Xiao Chen didn't put Yun Chen in his eyes at all. With his current strength, Xiao Chen didn't care about Yun Chen at all. Seeing that Xiao Chen didn't seem to care at all, and even said that he would destroy Mu Tian Mountain tomorrow, everyone present was stunned for a moment, but they soon cheered loudly. No matter what, Xiao Chen was confident, which was good news for everyone present. After all, they were all people who had joined the sword sect. Since the sword sect was strong, they naturally felt proud of it. What's more, Xiao Chen didn't have any intention of letting them fight. He wanted to rely on the sword sect's own strength to deal with this battle, which made everyone feel even more relieved. Not having to fight meant that there wouldn't be any casualties. Compared to the others, Dao Xiong, Luo Xing, and Li Xiao were deep in thought. Luo Xing even said with some worry, "Xiao Chen, why don't we go together tomorrow?" Mu Tian Mountain's strength couldn't be underestimated. Many forces had chosen to join Mu Tian Mountain. Star-Lord was worried that the Sword Sect wouldn't be able to do it alone. With the help of Saber Sect, Moon Palace, and Heavenly Policy Palace, their chances of winning would naturally be higher. Don't forget that Saber Sect and Moon Palace had two emperors. Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and Li Chun were all emperors. However, when he heard Luo Xing's words, Xiao Chen shook his head and refused without hesitation. "No need. The three of you can stay in the Cloud Palace tomorrow." Xiao Chen had been relaxed and confident since the beginning. Luo Xing did not say anything about this. Based on their understanding of Xiao Chen should not be an arrogant person. Since Xiao Chen did not even care about Mu Tian Mountain, that meant that Xiao Chen was confident of winning. As for Xin Yuanling, Long Qing, Song Xing, and the other higher-ups of the Sword Sect, they didn't say anything. All they needed to do was listen to Xiao Chen's orders. Whatever Xiao Chen said, they would do. The atmosphere of the banquet was very relaxed, especially after Xiao Chen's appearance. Everyone felt more at ease and some of their previous nervousness quickly dissipated. Xiao Chen only returned to his home late into the night. Qin Shuru and the other women were also very happy that Xiao Chen had come out of seclusion. However, when they heard that Xiao Chen would be going to Mu Tian Mountain to fight tomorrow, they couldn't help but feel worried. Husband, will you be fine tomorrow? Qin Shuru asked worriedly as they sat together. Don't worry, it's just a small matter. They're just a bunch of clowns, Xiao Chen replied with a smile. But we heard that Yun Chen has already broken through to the ancestor realm. Will he? The women were also worried about Yun Chen. Yun Chen breaking through to the ancestor realm was what worried them the most. However, Xiao Chen sneered in response. Is he worthy of being called an ancestor realm cultivator? He's not worthy. Don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow. Nothing will happen. Xiao Chen was sure that Yun Chen had obtained the ancestor realm through dishonorable means. Otherwise, why didn't he receive any divine punishment? It should be known that it was impossible to hide the divine punishment of the ancestor realm. If Yun Chen had really broken through to the ancestor realm, the divine punishment would have been felt by all the cultivators in the vast 1,000 domains. However, Yun Chen's breakthrough didn't cause the divine punishment to descend. What did this mean? It meant that even the laws of heaven and earth didn't recognize Yun Chen's ancestor realm cultivation. How could he go against the sword sect? He signaled Qin Shuru and the other women not to worry. Yun Chen and Mu Tian Mountain weren't enough to threaten him. Seeing that Xiao Chen was so relaxed, the other women didn't say anything else and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. After a silent night, Xiao Chen stopped cultivating the next morning. At the same time, many powerful people from the sword sect had gathered in the main square of the sword sect. From the most ordinary disciples to Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Song Xing, and the other higher-ups of the sword sect, they were all present. Today was the day that the sword sect and Mu Tian Mountain would fight. Xiao Chen finally appeared in the square as everyone waited. He stood in the air and looked at the many disciples of the sword sect below. Xiao Chen said indifferently, "There is only one goal in this battle, and that is to destroy Mu Tian Mountain. At the same time, it is also a battle to establish the might of the sword sect. Therefore, I hope that everyone can fight beautifully." Xiao Chen had never considered the outcome of the battle because to him, they would definitely win the battle. It was just a matter of how well they would win. Xiao Chen hoped that the sword sect would be able to destroy Mu Tian Mountain in an unstoppable manner. Following Xiao Chen's words, the entire Mu Tian Mountain's morale instantly soared and their fighting spirit soared to the heavens. Feeling the soaring fighting spirit of the entire sword sect, the powerful people from the various factions who were still in the sword sect sighed in their hearts. The sword sect was indeed powerful now. Just the disciples of the sword sect alone would be a rare genius in their own sections. This was the so-called natural selection. The strong would become stronger while the weak would become weaker. This was because many geniuses liked to choose a powerful faction. They would rather be an ordinary disciple in a powerful faction than be a tyrant in a small faction. This was what people often said. It was better to be the tail of a phoenix than the head of a chicken. The fighting spirit of the sword sect's disciples was completely ignited by Xiao Chen. Seeing this, Xiao Chen nodded slightly and then shouted, "Let's go." Following Xiao Chen's command, the disciples all soared into the sky and flew towards East Sword City. Everyone wanted to use the teleportation array in East Sword City to head to Mu Tian Mountain. After watching the disciples leave, Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and the other higher-ups of the sword sect surrounded Xiao Chen. "Third brother, how do you plan to fight this battle?" Xianyuan Ling asked as he looked at Xiao Chen. Hearing this, Xiao Chen only smiled and said, "Leave Yun Chen to me. You guys settle the rest." Xiao Chen did not have any plan for this battle. He was just reckless. Anyway, his strength completely crushed Mu Tian Mountain. The biggest problem was only Yun Chen. Xiao Chen had absolute confidence that he could kill Yun Chen with his sword. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, everyone was helpless. Did Xiao Chen really look down on Mu Tian Mountain so much? One had to know that Mu Tian Mountain's actions this time made them a little nervous. "Alright, let's go. Relax, this battle won't be too difficult." Xiao Chen said with a smile. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 25-27. Xiao Chen did not pay much attention to the battle. When they heard Xiao Chen's words, Xianyuan Ling and the rest heaved a sigh of relief. Xiao Chen's confidence had naturally affected them. Furthermore, Xiao Chen had also said that they could leave Yunchen to him. Xiao Chen did not pay much attention to the battle. When they heard Xiao Chen's words, Xianyuan Ling and the rest heaved a sigh of relief. Xiao Chen's confidence had naturally affected them. Furthermore, Xiao Chen had also said that they could leave Yunchen to him. Since Xiao Chen dared to say so, Xiao Chen's character meant that he was not afraid of Yunchen. Xiao Chen and the rest left the sword sect and headed straight for Mu Tian Mountain under the escort of the experts from the various major forces. The sword sect had made such a big move and Xiao Chen had no intention of hiding it. Hence, Mu Tian Mountain was the first to know about it. After the banquet last night, Mu Tian Mountain regained its peace. However, early in the morning, Yunchen, Yuntiani, and his son, as well as the higher-ups of Mu Tian Mountain, gathered in the main hall of Mu Tian Mountain. All of them did not look too good and were obviously not as radiant as they were last night. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. Xiao Chen's reputation in the Great Thousand World was such that even the older generation of emperors like Yun Chen did not dare to underestimate him. Now that Xiao Chen had come out of seclusion, the first thing he did was to attack Mu Tian Mountain. This naturally made the people of Mu Tian Mountain nervous. A sword sect without Xiao Chen and a sword sect with Xiao Chen were two completely different things. The pressure that Xiao Chen exerted on Mu Tian Mountain was something that no one could replace. As long as Xiao Chen was around, it was impossible for the people to not be nervous. Looking at the solemn faces of the people present, Yun Chen, who was sitting on the main seat, said, "Why? Are all of you scared out of your wits by Xiao Chen?" Being afraid before the battle was definitely a military taboo. Both sides had not really started the battle, but the people on their side were already afraid. In that case, how were they going to fight? They were naturally inferior to the other party. Hearing Yun Chen's words, the people present did not respond. Seeing this, a look of helplessness flashed across Yun Chen's eyes. Xiao Chen's fierce reputation. Xiao had proven himself throughout the journey and was known as a legend. Along the way, he had proven himself. He was a lot of people's expectations. However, now that Mu Tianshan was completely at odds with Swords Gate, there was no way he would back down. Swords Gate wouldn't give Mu Tianshan such an opportunity either. Therefore, a battle was unavoidable. In order to ease the tension in everyone's heart, the best way was naturally for Yun Chen to defeat Xiao Chen. As long as Xiao Chen's undefeated legend could be broken, then the situation would change greatly. No matter how much he said, it was better to defeat Xiao Chen in front of everyone. It would be more convincing. Thinking of this, Yun Chen did not say anything else. Since the battle with the sword sect was inevitable, he could only fight. Although Xiao Chen was fierce, he was only an Emperor Realm Master after all. On the other hand, Yun Chen was an Ancestor Realm Master. Naturally, he was not afraid of Xiao Chen. Thinking of this, Yun Chen's confidence increased greatly. He stood up and said loudly, "Everyone, prepare yourselves. This battle is inevitable. It is also the battle for the rise of my Mu Tian Mountain. If we win, my Mu Tian Mountain will be the true overlord of the Great Thousand World. As for Xiao Chen, this king will personally take care of him." Xiao Chen wanted Yun Chen to personally take action because the key to this battle was Xiao Chen. As long as he could defeat Xiao Chen, everything would be settled. As for Yun Tiani, although he had also broken through to the Emperor realm, Yun Chen was still worried. Or rather, Yun Chen did not think that Yun Tiani could defeat Xiao Chen. There were some things that even as a father, Yun Chen had to admit. Xiao Qin was indeed much more outstanding than Yun Tianyi. When Yun Chen said this, the higher-ups of Mu Tian Mountain heaved a sigh of relief. Especially when they felt the strong confidence exuding from Yun Chen, everyone felt even more confident. As Yun Chen's voice fell, everyone in Mu Tian Mountain quickly prepared for battle. At the same time, the various great forces that had sided with Mu Tian Mountain also made their preparations. Unlike the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen did not let the forces that supported the Sword Sect take action. Even the three great Ling Tian sects, Saber Sect, Moon Palace, and Heavenly Policy Palace, were not allowed by Xiao Chen. Mu Tian Mountain wanted to gather all their forces to defeat the Sword Sect in one fell swoop. However, from the choice of the two, it could be seen that compared to the Sword Sect, Mu Tian Mountain was obviously more nervous. Although Yun Chen tried his best to appear confident, it could still be seen that Yun Chen could not help but be nervous in his heart. The Sword Sect gave off a feeling of confidence from the beginning to the end, as if they did not put Mu Tian Mountain in their eyes. As for Mu Tian Mountain, although he looked confident on the surface, deep down, there was still deep worry. The battle preparations were done, and they were only waiting for the Sword Sect to arrive. At Yun Chen's residence, Yun Chen, who was waiting for the Sword Sect to arrive, looked calm on the surface, but he was actually a little nervous in his heart. "Father, Xiao Chen." Sitting beside Yun Chen, Yun Tianyi whispered. Yun Tianyi didn't know if Yun Chen was a match for Xiao Chen, but before he finished his sentence, Yun Chen interrupted. "Why? Do you think I'm not a match for Xiao Chen?" Unknowingly, Xiao Chen had given off a strong sense of oppression to the older generation of venerable sovereigns. He was clearly a junior, but unknowingly, when Yun Chen heard the two words Xiao Chen, the corners of his eyes couldn't help but twitch. It wasn't obvious during normal times, but once you became enemies with the Sword Sect and Xiao Chen, you could clearly feel it. Logically speaking, Yun Chen had broken through to the ancestor realm and shouldn't be afraid of Xiao Chen at all. But for some unknown reason, after hearing that Xiao Chen had come out of seclusion, Yun Chen couldn't help but feel nervous. However, Yun Chen definitely wouldn't show it because once Yun Chen cowered, there would be no way for him to fight this battle, and it would be a crushing defeat. Yun Chen glanced at Yun Tianyi with an ugly expression and didn't say anything else as he quietly waited for Xiao Chen's arrival. Compared to the slightly tense points on Mount Mu Tian's side, Xiao Chen's side was much more relaxed. Along the way to Mount Mu Tian, the disciples of the Sword Sect were majestic. Everyone was filled with battle intent and didn't seem to be afraid at all. Together with Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Song Xing, and the others, Xiao Chen leisurely rushed to Mount Mu Tian. The speed of the main group was naturally much slower, but Xiao Chen didn't seem to be in a hurry. Moreover, to everyone's surprise, Qin Shuru and the other girls, as well as Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao, actually came along for this battle. Xiao Chen actually didn't reject them. Looking at the two boys beside Qin Shuru and the other girls, Xianyuan Ling said somewhat helplessly, "Third brother, swords have no eyes. How could you let these two boys come along? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 25-28. Xianyuan Ling was worried about the safety of Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. This time, they were not going on a sightseeing tour. They were going to battle Mu Tian Mountain. Xiao Chen had actually brought the two of them along. Xianyuan Ling was worried about the safety of Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. This time, they were not going on a sightseeing tour. They were going to battle Mu Tian Mountain. Xiao Chen had actually brought the two of them along. In the face of Xianyuan Ling's worries, Xiao Chen did not mind at all. He smiled and said, "Since the two of them insisted on coming along, there's no harm in letting them take a look. After all, they will have to come into contact with each other sooner or later. As Xiao Chen's sons, they would definitely not be able to avoid such matters in the future." In Xiao Chen's opinion, It was not a bad thing to let them come into contact with such situations earlier. Hearing this, Xian Yuanling said helplessly, "You, Sai, aren't you afraid of any danger?" Xian Yuanling was a little helpless. Xiao Chen did not take this battle seriously from the beginning to the end. Xian Yuanling knew that, but he did not expect Xiao Chen to be so relaxed. Xiao Chen did not look like he was going to war. He was clearly going on a sightseeing tour, and he even brought his family along. Knowing what Xian Yuanling was worried about, Xiao Chen smiled and comforted him. "Don't worry, big brother. We will definitely win this battle. You will know when the time comes. There's no need to be so nervous." How could he not be nervous? Hearing this, Xian Yuanling complained in his heart. The strength of Mu Tian Mountain was obvious to all, especially Yun Chen. Furthermore, this battle concerned the sword sect's position as the overlord of the Great Thousand World in the future. How could Xian Yuanling not take it seriously? One must know that there could not be any accidents in this battle. Since they were already here, there was no point for Xian Yuanling to worry. Furthermore, since Xiao Chen was so confident, Xian Yuanling was slightly relieved. After 3 days, the people from the sword sect finally arrived at Mu Tian Mountain. Along the way, Mu Tian Mountain did not send anyone to stop them. Evidently, they wanted to settle this battle with the sword sect. The sky above where Mu Tian Mountain was already filled with the strong cultivators of Mu Tian Mountain. Everyone waited quietly. Not long after, black figures appeared in the sky. These were the strong cultivators of Sword's Gate. The sword sect had finally arrived, and the battle was about to start. Sword sect's disciples. Sword. And many powerful. Sword sect's people. Xiao. And other. And the. Take good care of these two. Xiao Chen instructed Qin Shuru and the other ladies. He then appeared at the front. He was still dressed in white. With Xiao Chen's appearance, the atmosphere instantly became extremely tense, especially on Mu Tianshan's side. Everyone's eyes fell on Xiao Chen, and there was a tinge of fear in their eyes. They had no choice. The young man in front of them was the most outstanding person in the Great Thousand World. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was a legend in the Great Thousand World. Facing Xiao Chen as an enemy, no one could remain calm. Xiao Chen used to be their pride and hope. However, to the warriors in Mu Tian Mountain's camp, Xiao Chen was like a huge mountain that was pressing down on their heads. They felt suffocated. It was an uncomfortable feeling. Some people even retreated unconsciously. However, Xiao Chen was extremely relaxed. Xiao Chen scanned the crowd and said, "Yun Chen, why aren't you showing yourself? Are you going to be a coward now?" Xiao Chen's voice was not loud, but it was clearly heard by everyone. As soon as Xiao Chen finished speaking, Yun Chen and Yun Tianyi finally appeared in front of him. The three of them stood facing each other. Looking at the relaxed Xiao Chen in front of him, Yun Tianyi's face darkened. Xiao Chen, Yun Tianyi had never been convinced by Xiao Chen. Otherwise, he would not have chosen to go against the sword sect. In front of Xiao Chen, Yun Tianyi instinctively wanted to show off. He wanted to tell the world that he was not inferior to Xiao Chen. However, Xiao Chen was not interested in Yun Tianyi's wishful thinking. Although he could tell at a glance that Yun Tianyi was an Emperor Realm Master, his aura was weak. Xiao Chen could tell at a glance that Yun Tianyi had probably used some underhanded means to break through to the Emperor Realm. Xiao Chen was not interested in dealing with such a person. Therefore, before Yun Tianyi could finish speaking, Xiao Chen interrupted him. "Get lost. Yun Tianyi was not worthy of his attention. Even his father Yun Chen was not worthy of Xiao Chen's attention, let alone Yun Tianyi. Yun Tianyi might seem to be an Emperor Realm Master now, but as long as Xiao Chen wanted to, he could definitely kill Yun Tianyi in an instant. Xiao Chen was not interested in dealing with such a person. Xiao Chen scolded Yun Tianyi mercilessly. Ignoring Yuntian's ashen face, Xiao Chen's gaze landed on Yunchen as he spoke with a faint smile. When the righteous and demonic war ended, I guessed that Mu Tian Mountain would definitely jump out. Xiao Chen was not surprised by Mu Tian Mountain's actions because it was very difficult to make Mu Tian Mountain submit to the sword sect. Moreover, there was definitely the shadow of other universes behind this, so it was even less surprising. Yunchen frowned slightly when he heard Xiao Chen's words, but before he could speak, Xiao Chen continued. I know that your Mu Tian Mountain's strength has increased by quite a bit. You can even say that you've been reborn. However, I don't think I need to tell you how much of this strength came about. How much of it do you think is real in exchange for strength through such underhanded means? However, since you are willing to be the cannon fodder of other universes, I will fulfill your wish. As he spoke, Xiao Chen did not hide the disdain in his words. Yun Chen's anger continued to rise. He was already at the ancestor state, but in Xiao Chen's eyes, he was so unbearable. Yun Chen could not accept this at all. In Yun Chen's opinion, no matter how monstrous Xiao Chen was, he was just a junior. How dare a junior talk nonsense in front of him? Moreover, he had already broken through to the ancestor state and was the true strongest person in the Great Thousand World. However, even so, Xiao Chen still did not take him seriously. This was too much. A cold light flashed in Yun Chen's eyes as he stared at Xiao Chen and said coldly, "You have a glib tongue. Xiao Chen, do you really think that you are the only one who calls the shots in the Great Thousand World? I don't know if it is, but it is definitely not up to you." As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chen could not be bothered to talk nonsense with Yun Chen and his son. He waved his hand and interrupted Yun Chen, who was about to speak. Disciples of the Sword Sect, listen up. Destroy Mu Tian Mountain and leave no one alive. He directly gave the order to start the battle. Upon hearing this, the disciples of the Sword Sect were filled with fighting spirit and immediately charged toward Mu Tian Mountain's camp. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 25-29. The battle was on the verge of breaking out. The disciples of the Sword Sect rushed towards the people of Mu Tian Mountain like wolves and tigers. Facing the attack of the Sword Sect, the people of Mu Tian Mountain naturally wouldn't allow themselves to be captured, and a fierce battle broke out. The battle was on the verge of breaking out. The disciples of the Sword Sect rushed towards the people of Mu Tian Mountain like wolves and tigers. Facing the attack of the Sword Sect, the people of Mu Tian Mountain naturally wouldn't allow themselves to be captured, and a fierce battle broke out. Mu Tian Mountain was actually quite confident about this battle, and the source of their confidence was Yun Chen. As long as Yun Chen could kill Xiao Chen with his ancestor realm cultivation, Mu Tian Mountain would win this battle. Therefore, before Yun Chen fell, the people of Mu Tian Mountain naturally wouldn't retreat at all. As the two sides fought, Song Xing and the other vice sect masters also fought against Mu Tian Mountain's vice sect masters. In just one exchange, Song Xing and the others discovered that the vice sect masters of Mu Tian Mountain had all broken through to the half-step emperor realm. A glint flashed across their eyes. No wonder Mu Tian Mountain dared to openly declare war on the Sword Sect. It turned out that they were already prepared. However, the fact that the strength of the people of Mu Tian Mountain could improve so much in such a short period of time meant that someone was helping them. Just like Song Xing and the others, if it weren't for Gong Nan Tian, Lin Yuan, and the others, they wouldn't have broken through to the half-step emperor realm so quickly. Now, the cultivation of the vice sect masters of Mu Tian Mountain was the same as theirs. This clearly explained everything. However, the cultivation of the vice sect masters of Mu Tian Mountain was obviously much more superficial compared to Song Xing and the others. It was as if their foundation wasn't stable. In fact, this was also the problem of the three vice sect masters. Firstly, the three vice sect masters used methods to help the people of Mu Tian Mountain increase their cultivation. Secondly, the three vice sect masters couldn't bear to spend too many resources on Mu Tian Mountain. Unlike Gong Nan Tian, Lin Yuan, and the others who were willing to invest in the sword sect, Song Xing and the others relied on the pills given by Gong Nan Tian and the others to break through to the half-step emperor realm. As for the vice sect masters of Mu Tian Mountain, they obviously didn't have such good treatment. They had only broken through to the half-step emperor realm because of excessive enthusiasm. In this regard, Song Xing and the others had also sensed this at the first moment they exchanged blows. With such a superficial realm, how strong could his battle prowess be? So what if he broke through to the half-step emperor realm? Seems like your Mu Tian Mountain is just as the sect master said. You guys used some underhanded means to increase your strength by so much. Song Xing laughed coldly as he fought. Hearing this, the face of a Mu Tian Mountain vice sect leader who was fighting against him darkened. Isn't it the same for your sword gate? Without the experts from Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace, do you think you can break through so quickly? From Mu Tian Mountain's point of view, relying on he and the others to increase their strength was no different from relying on the sword sect, because the sword sect also relied on the experts from other universes. However, although they both relied on the experts from other universes, there was a fundamental difference between the two. To put it bluntly, Gong Nan Tian, Lin Yuan, and the others were willing to do so, but he and the others were unwilling. One side was very willing to invest resources, and it was not simply using the method of spoiling things through excessive enthusiasm. On the other hand, the other side was not willing to invest too many resources at all. Instead, they chose to forcefully increase their cultivation. These two methods might not seem to be different, but in fact, there was a huge difference. Not to mention that it would affect one's future achievements. Even the difference in battle prowess after breaking through would be like heaven and earth. Therefore, Song Xing sneered when he heard the words of the Mu Tian Mountain Vice Sect Master. These guys broke through for nothing, but their battle prowess didn't increase by much. The battle had already broken out, and it seemed that they were evenly matched at the moment, but all of this was about to change when Xiao Chen and Yun Chen took action. According to what was said before, Xianyuan Ling was going to fight Yun Tianyi, and before this, Yun Tianyi was actually boasting shamelessly that he wanted to fight Xiao Chen, which was simply laughable. Xiao Chen, do you dare to fight me? Yun Tianyi shouted coldly as he looked at Xiao Chen. Yun Tianyi actually dared to take the initiative to challenge him. Hearing this, Xiao Chen immediately revealed a disdainful smile. Naturally, he could tell that Yun Tianyi was now an Emperor Realm Master, but so what? Yun Tianyi wanted to fight him with just an Emperor Realm, Small Perfection Realm Master? It was simply a fool's dream. He had no interest in Yun Tianyi at all. Xiao Chen sneered, "You're not worthy." Xiao Chen's target was only Yun Chen. As for Yun Tianyi, he was indeed not worthy enough for him to take action personally. Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing could easily defeat Yun Tianyi. Yun Tianyi's cultivation might seem to be a minor realm higher than Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, but their battle prowess was completely unequal. Yun Tianyi's aura was weak, so how could he be a match for Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing? Following Xiao Chen's words, Xianyuan Ling immediately came in front of Yun Tianyi and said indifferently, "I'll fight you." After speaking, Xianyuan Ling directly attacked without waiting for Yun Tianyi's reply, while Long Qing went straight to Mu Tian Mountain's camp and started a massacre. Only Yun Chen and Xiao Chen had yet to take action. The two of them stood opposite each other, and Yun Chen said calmly, "The outcome of this battle is between the two of us. As long as I kill you, I'll win this battle." Yun Chen understood that as long as he could defeat Xiao Chen, Mu Tian Mountain would definitely win this battle. Xiao Chen did not refute this and said with a faint smile, "By the same logic, if I kill you, I'll definitely win this battle." Xiao Chen's words were full of confidence. It was as if killing Yun Chen was something that was in the bag. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yun Chen's face turned cold, then he laughed wildly. Haha, Xiao Chen, someone once told me that you're very arrogant. Today I've seen it with my own eyes. However, don't you think that you're dreaming if you want to kill me? Do you know how impossible it is for an Emperor Realm Master to kill an Ancestor Realm Master? If you were a true Ancestor Realm Master, I naturally wouldn't have such confidence. However, I think you should know better than me how your Ancestor Realm came about. An Ancestor Realm Master like you can't be considered a true Ancestor Realm Master. So, how difficult would it be for me to kill you? Xiao Chen had always looked down on Yun Chen's Ancestor Realm Master. Moreover, after seeing Yun Chen, Xiao Chen became even more determined. This guy's Ancestor Realm Master couldn't be any more fake. An Ancestor Realm Master like him was just a facade. On the surface, he seemed to have the might of an Ancestor Realm Master, but in reality, he was thousands of miles away from a true Ancestor Realm Master. How could this make Xiao Chen feel fear? As his voice fell, Xiao Chen directly spoke without waiting for Yun Chen's reply. It's useless to say more. Make your move. Today, I'll let you see with your own eyes what kind of joke your so-called Ancestor Realm is. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 25-30. Xiao Chen had never put Yun Chen in his eyes since the beginning. When he heard Xiao Chen's contemptuous words, Yun Chen's face turned extremely gloomy. He was already an Ancestor Realm Master, but in front of Xiao Chen, he was still humiliated in such a manner. How could Yun Chen accept this? Xiao Chen had never put Yun Chen in his eyes since the beginning. When he heard Xiao Chen's contemptuous words, Yun Chen's face turned extremely gloomy. He was already an Ancestor Realm Master, but in front of Xiao Chen, he was still humiliated in such a manner. How could Yun Chen accept this? The killing intent in his eyes continued to condense as Yun Chen said coldly, "You have a glib tongue. Today, this king will let you know what an insurmountable gap is." As he spoke, a terrifying aura surged from Yun Chen's body. It had already surpassed the Emperor Realm. He was indeed an Ancestor Realm Master. However, in Xiao Chen's eyes, Yun Chen's aura was simply too weak. Along the way, Xiao Chen had seen many Ancestor Realm Masters. Whether it was the monk and Taoist of Cloud Palace, or Gong Nan Tian and Yu Luo of Immortal Palace, they were all Ancestor Realm Masters. However, their auras were far from what Yun Chen could compare with. To be honest, they were all Ancestor Realm Masters, but compared to Yun Chen, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. There was indeed an insurmountable gap between the Ancestor Realm and the Emperor Realm, and it was impossible for an Emperor Realm cultivator to jump realms and defeat an Ancestor Realm Master. No matter how high one's talent was, it was impossible to do so. After all, one was a genius, but who would be mediocre if they could break through to the Ancestor Realm? Therefore, geniuses against geniuses, heaven's pride against heaven's pride. If one wanted to surpass a great realm to defeat another, what was this if not wishful thinking? However, such a gap was built on the cultivation base of the true progenitor realm. Yun Chen's cultivation base was still far from that of a true progenitor realm expert. This was also the reason why Xiao Chen didn't think much of him. Yun Chen believed that Yun Chen himself could feel how superficial his cultivation was. However, he was still unwilling to admit it. This was a sign of stupidity to the extreme. Feeling Yun Chen's coercion, Xiao Chen's expression remained unchanged as a terrifying aura rose from his body. As Xiao Chen took the initiative to reveal his aura, Xiao Chen's current cultivation realm was completely revealed to everyone, the Emperor Realm Grand Perfection Realm. That's right, with the help of the Source Strength, Xiao Chen's cultivation broke through to the Emperor Realm Grand Perfection within a few months, even though it was just a small mass of source strength. Moreover, Xiao Chen's breakthrough was completely different from Yun Chen's. When Xiao Chen broke through to the Emperor Realm Grand Perfection, his aura was vigorous and there wasn't the slightest bit of weakness in it. It was simply incomparable to Yun Chen's. Peak Emperor Realm Master. Even Yun Chen couldn't help but be stunned when he sensed Xiao Chen's cultivation. How could Xiao Chen's breakthrough be so fast? He really didn't expect Xiao Chen's cultivation to have reached the Emperor Realm Grand Perfection realm. Facing Yun Chen's surprise, Xiao Chen just smiled coldly and said, "There's nothing to be surprised about. This is the gap between you and me." "Humph, Xiao Chen, don't be happy too early. Even if you broke through to the Emperor Realm Grand Perfection realm, so what? In the end, you still haven't stepped into the Ancestor realm." Yun Chen coldly snorted when he heard this. "Heh, you speak as if you have already stepped into the Ancestor realm." Hearing this, Xiao Chen smiled disdainfully and took a step forward, his figure instantly disappearing as he sent a punch towards Yun Chen. Facing Xiao Chen's attack, Yun Chen naturally wouldn't back down. He thought that relying on his Ancestor realm cultivation, he would be able to crush Xiao Chen in a head-on clash. Thinking so, Yun Chen also sent out a punch towards Xiao Chen's attack. The two fists collided, but the final result was quite different from what Yun Chen had imagined. Originally, he thought that relying on his Ancestor realm cultivation, he would be able to crush Xiao Chen in a head-on clash. But the moment their fists collided, Yun Chen immediately felt a terrifying power coming from Xiao Chen's fist. This power caused Yun Chen to turn pale with fright. In a face-to-face clash, Yun Chen was actually at a disadvantage. He already had an Ancestor realm cultivation, but he was still at a disadvantage when facing Xiao Chen. How is this possible? After being forced back a few steps, Yun Chen looked at Xiao Chen in disbelief. Facing Yun Chen's shock, Xiao Chen said calmly, "Nothing is impossible. Moreover, I have already said that your cultivation isn't at the Ancestor realm. Compared to an Ancestor realm master, you are far from it." Xiao Chen had never regarded Yun Chen as an Ancestor realm master, so he wasn't surprised at all by this result. This was within reason. His cultivation base was solid, while Yun Chen's cultivation base was extremely superficial. Comparing the two of them, it was clear who was stronger and who was weaker. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yun Chen immediately roared angrily, "Impossible! I am an Ancestor realm master, and you are only an Emperor realm master. How can you defeat me? I don't believe it, I don't believe it." Saying so, Yun Chen attacked Xiao Chen again like a madman. Obviously, Yun Chen couldn't accept the exchange just now. He had broken through to the Ancestor realm with great difficulty and was originally full of confidence, but reality poured a bucket of cold water on Yun Chen. He was actually not Xiao Chen's opponent. How could Yun Chen admit this? How could he accept this? He had broken through to the Ancestor realm with great difficulty, but in the end, he still wasn't Xiao Chen's opponent. What's more, Jun Wuya hadn't even appeared in the sword sect. Under such circumstances, if he lost to Xiao Chen, then what was he, Yun Chen, worth? What was he? Unable to accept this result, Yun Chen attacked Xiao Chen madly. Seeing this, Xiao Chen shook his head. Yun Chen's Dao heart was already unstable. Even if he could survive this battle, he would probably be completely crippled in the future. After a series of events, Yun Chen had indeed become a little extreme. Or it could be said that because he had forcefully increased his cultivation, many problems had appeared in Yun Chen's body. Yun Chen himself might not have noticed these problems. Facing Yun Chen's crazy counterattack, Xiao Chen didn't panic. Yun Chen, who was close to madness, was even less likely to be his opponent. Xiao Chen was very clear about this. Xiao Chen didn't even summon his dustless sword. He only used his hands to block Yun Chen's attack. Looking at Yun Chen, who was getting crazier and crazier, Xiao Chen said indifferently, "From the day you stepped into the martial Tao, you should have known that there is no such thing as a free lunch in this world, especially when it comes to cultivation. In order to obtain power, you have turned yourself into a monster. Is it worth it? Bullsh *T, I am an Ancestor Realm expert. Ancestor Realm expert die." Xiao Chen felt sorry for Yun Chen, but Yun Chen simply couldn't accept these words. Upon hearing these words, he immediately roared furiously with a ferocious expression. His rationality was also slowly fading away. It was as if he had lost his mind and was in a delirious state. He only thought that he was the strongest expert in the Great Thousand World. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 25-31. Yun Chen's ferocious face let Xiao Chen know that this guy was beyond redemption. On one hand, it was because of the pleasure brought by the rapid rise in strength, and on the other hand, it was because he could not accept the blow of reality. Now, Yun Chen was on the verge of madness. He thought that after breaking through to the Ancestor Realm, he should be able to create havoc in the Great Thousand World, but who would have thought that before Yun Chen could truly be arrogant, Xiao Chen would mercilessly shatter all his fantasies. So what if he was at the Ancestor Realm? The power he obtained through such means was still unable to withstand a single blow from Xiao Chen. Unable to accept this reality, the last line of defense in Yun Chen's heart began to collapse inch by inch. An Emperor Realm Master who once stood at the top of the Great Thousand World had now become like this, and all of this was because of the temptation of power. It was understandable that cultivators yearned for great power, because every cultivator embarked on the path of the martial Tao because of power. However, a gentleman's desire for wealth was justified, and so was power. No matter how great one's power was, it was impossible and unrealistic to reap without sowing. And those who obtained power through shady means were even more despised. They were like the moon in the water, and they seemed to be extremely beautiful and could reach the heavens in a single step, but in reality they were just paper tigers that could be broken with a single poke. If it was really like Yun Chen, who could easily make an Emperor Realm Master break through to the Ancestor Realm through such means, then the Demon Abyss would have dominated a region long ago, and how could there only be a few Ancestor Realm Masters in their sect? Even the Demon Abyss would not use their own people to forcefully break through to the Ancestor Realm. From this, it could be seen that they themselves were aware of the harm this method would bring. Everything was because of greed. They wanted to reach the heavens in a single step, but they did not want to put in the corresponding effort. In this way, the result could only be like this. Looking at Yun Chen's face becoming more and more distorted and his eyes becoming scarlet, Xiao Chen sighed softly and said, "A dignified Emperor Realm Master, how high-spirited you were back then. Forget it, let this junior send you off today." Back then, Yun Chen had indeed been high-spirited. He had single-handedly established Mu Tian Mountain and led it to become one of the 10 great Ling Tian sects. Such a person should be remembered by future generations even in the history of the Great Thousand World. What a pity, what a pity, what a pity. It was this kind of person who could be called a hero, but at the last moment he was so ugly. His previous high-spirited and vigorous spirit was completely gone. The Wuchen sword appeared in Xiao Chen's hand as soon as he thought about it. There were not many changes to Xiao Chen's body when he held the Wuchen sword. The sword aura that should have been extremely sharp became extremely ordinary at the moment. This was Xiao Chen's improvement. Sometimes, the more frightening one looked, the more powerful one was. In this world, many things could only display their purest power after they had truly returned to their original state. Xiao Chen's sword was now transforming in this direction. It was no longer as sharp as before, as if it had been washed clean and returned to its ordinary state. However, the more it was like this, the more terrifying Xiao Chen's sword was. This was also a process that every sword cultivator had to go through. Unfortunately, many sword cultivators simply could not reach this step. They did not even have the chance to touch this threshold before their lives came to an end. His face was calm, without any sadness or joy, and without any killing intent. Xiao Chen looked at Yunchen calmly and said indifferently, "Rest in peace and go on your way. Consider it as preserving your last shred of dignity." After saying that, Xiao Chen slashed out with his sword. The ordinary sword edge instantly attacked Yunchen. Facing Xiao Chen's sword, Yunchen, who had already gone crazy, clearly had no intention of dodging. He planned to meet it head-on. He had completely lost his mind. Yun Chen's choice was also proven to be foolish. With his so-called ancestor realm, it was simply impossible for him to meet Xiao Chen head-on. The sword edge swept past. Yun Chen's defense was unable to stop it at all. The sword edge directly landed on Yun Chen's body. However, Yun Chen did not die. Xiao Chen had clearly expected this result. He slashed out again. This time, Yun Chen was directly killed. The intense battle between the two was, to be honest, not intense. It could be said that Xiao Chen had always held the absolute advantage, completely crushing Yun Chen. Even when he killed Yun Chen with the last two swords, Xiao Chen appeared to be very calm. This was Yun Chen, who was known to have broken through to the ancestor realm. However, in the hands of Xiao Chen, he was killed with two swords. Before he died, Yun Chen looked at Xiao Chen with a face full of unwillingness and doubt. He said, Why, I have already broken through to the ancestor realm. This ancestor realm was not broken through by you. Naturally, it is not considered your power, Xiao Chen said indifferently. Yun Chen died and his corpse fell from the sky. The crowd, who had been watching the battle between the two, was shocked when they saw that Yun Chen was killed by Xiao Chen with two swords. The fighting spirit of the sword sect was naturally high. Xiao Chen's strength made many disciples of the sword sect extremely excited. This was their sect master, the invincible sect master of the sword sect. As for the major forces in Mu Tian Mountain's camp, their faces were all pale. Yun Chen was in existence who had broken through to the ancestor realm. However, in front of Xiao Chen, he was still killed with two swords. Even Yun Chen was killed by Xiao Chen so easily. In that case, what would happen to them? Yun Chen was dead. Everyone knew that there was no suspense in the battle. Mu Tian Mountain had publicly declared war on the sword sect. However, in the end, they were easily suppressed by the sword sect and did not cause any waves at all. Originally, they thought that this battle might engulf the entire world and plunge the great thousand world into the flames of war again. However, who would have thought that the outcome would be like this? The outcome was determined in one battle and Mu Tian Mountain was suppressed in one battle. At this moment, everyone thought that perhaps from the beginning, Mu Tian Mountain's actions were a joke in the eyes of the sword sect. A small grasshopper that could not even be seen on the stage actually dared to jump around in front of the sword sect. From the beginning to the end, the sword sect probably treated Mu Tian Mountain's declaration of war as a joke. The experts of the major forces who had chosen Mu Tian Mountain were filled with regret. They knew very well that they had to pay a heavy price for choosing the wrong side this time. After all, this was their own choice and they naturally had to bear all the consequences. However, compared to the shock and fear of the crowd, Yun Tian's eyes instantly turned red when he saw Yun Chen being killed. He immediately locked his gaze on Xiao Chen and shouted angrily, "Father! Xiao Chen, I'm going to kill you!" As he said that, he charged directly towards Xiao Chen. His murderous intent almost swallowed up the last bit of rationality Yun Tian had left. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 25-32. Yun Chen's death was a huge blow to Yun Tian. He charged towards Xiao Chen in a frenzy. Unfortunately, before he could approach Xiao Chen, he was blocked by Xianyuan Ling. Yun Chen's death was a huge blow to Yun Tianyi. He charged towards Xiao Chen in a frenzy. Unfortunately, before he could approach Xiao Chen, he was blocked by Xianyuan Ling. With a slash of his blade, Xianyuan Ling forced Yun Tianyi back. He then said expressionlessly, "Everyone chooses their own path. You can't blame anyone for this outcome." At this moment, Yun Tianyi looked very pitiful. His eyes were red, his hair was messy, and there were many wounds on his body. They were all caused by Xianyuan Ling. Just like Yun Chen, Yun Tianyi was no match for Xianyuan Ling. Even though his cultivation was a minor realm higher than Xianyuan Ling's, he was still no match for Xianyuan Ling. Tears flowed from Yun Tianyi's eyes. Ever since he was young, Yun Tianyi had never seen his mother. It had always been Yun Chen who raised Yun Tianyi alone. In the past, Yun Chen was a godlike existence in Yun Tianyi's eyes. It was as long as his father was there was no need to worry about anything. He was like a mountain that shielded him from the wind and rain. No matter when or where, he could always be safe and warm. He had never thought that there would be a day when this mountain would collapse. Moreover, it was right in front of him, yet he was powerless to do anything about it. Yun Tianyi clenched his sword tightly. His fingernails pierced into his flesh as if he couldn't feel any pain. He clenched his teeth and stared at Xianyuan Ling and Xiao Chen. Especially Xiao Chen. It was him who had taken away his father. Die. Yun Tianyi spat out the word in a hoarse voice. Even though he knew he wasn't Xianyuan Ling's match, he had no intention of retreating or escaping. Or it could be said that Yun Tianyi didn't want to flee anymore. After Yun Chen's death, he would no longer have a family in this world. Rather than living alone, he would rather die on the battlefield like his father. Just as Xianyuan Ling had said, people had to pay the price for their own choices. Perhaps he was wrong, so he should bear the price that he should bear. Seeing Yun Chen rushing over once again, Xianyuan Ling sighed. A pitiful person must have a hateful side. At this moment, Yun Tianyi was indeed pitiful, but Xianyuan Ling couldn't let him go. From the moment the Yun father and son declared war on the sword sect, everything had already been decided and couldn't be changed. The sword in his hand fiercely slashed out. The first slash broke through Yun Chen's defense, the second slash ruthlessly landed on Yun Chen's chest. Immediately after, Xianyuan Ling planned to slash out a third slash towards Yun Tianyi's neck. He planned to end Yun Tianyi's life. Since he was going to die, then he would give him a quick death. However, just as Xianyuan Ling's third slash was about to land, suddenly Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao and Li Chun arrived. Dao Ju even yelled, "Brother Xianyuan, please wait. Spare him." Dao Ju tried to stop Xianyuan Ling. Hearing that, Xianyuan Ling's hand stopped. Dao Ju and the other two took this opportunity to come to Xianyuan Ling's side. Dao Ju took the initiative to cup his hands and salute. "Brother Xianyuan, what do you mean?" Looking at Dao Ju, Xianyuan Ling frowned slightly. If Dao Ju was pleading for Yun Tianyi, then Xianyuan Ling could only say that Dao Ju's head was stuck between a door. This was because everyone knew that the sword sect would never let Yun Tianyi and his son go. Everyone else could live, but only the father and son had to die. Seeing that Xianyuan Ling was unhappy, Dao Ju helplessly smiled bitterly and said, "Brother Xianyuan, please don't misunderstand. I don't have any other intentions. I just hope to give Yun Tianyi a chance to end his own life." After all, they were all monstrous geniuses of the great thousand world. Furthermore, Dao Ju and the others had known Yun Tianyi since they were young. After all, they were of similar age and status. Naturally, it was easy for them to become friends. Perhaps they weren't very familiar with each other, but seeing Yun Tianyi in such a state, Dao Ju still sighed. Since that was the case, why not leave Yun Tianyi with a little dignity so that he wouldn't disgrace the name of the great thousand world? Hearing Dao Ju's words, before Xianyuan Ling could say anything, Xiao Chen's voice sounded. "Big brother, let them be. Since Xiao Chun had nodded, Xianyuan Ling naturally wouldn't say anything else. He only glanced at Yun Tianyi indifferently, then took a step back. However, he didn't leave. Dao Ju's pleading for Yun Tianyi's last shred of dignity. Turning his head to look at Yun Tianyi, whose hair was disheveled and blood was flowing everywhere, Dao Ju originally wanted to say something. However, when he opened his mouth, he didn't know what to say. In the end, he could only sigh silently. This was the cruelty of reality. The winner was the king and the loser was the bandit. Only the strong could decide everything. Dao Ju didn't know what to say. Yun Tianyi didn't pay any attention to the three of them. He took a deep look at Xiao Chun, who was standing above him, with a complicated expression. In the end, without saying a word, Yun Tianyi descended from the sky and slowly landed beside his father, Yun Chen's corpse. Looking at his father, who had died long ago, Yun Tianyi cried bitterly. At this moment, Yun Tianyi was crying like a child. Kneeling in front of Yun Chen's corpse, Yun Tianyi finally regretted and said painfully, "Father, I was wrong, I was wrong." Yun Tianyi regretted declaring war on the sword sect. If he hadn't insisted on going against the sword sect, things wouldn't have turned out this way. One must know that at the beginning, Yun Chen didn't agree to go against the sword sect. It was Yun Tianyi who persevered and persuaded Yun Chen to agree. Perhaps Yun Chen had his own considerations, but how could it not be that he didn't dote on Yun Tianyi? Yun Tianyi's choice was still his father's. He had caused the death of the entire Mu Tian mountain. Yun Tianyi could not stop crying. After about 10 minutes, Yun Tianyi slowly stopped crying and looked up at Xiao Chen, who was in the sky. At this moment, Xiao Chen was truly standing at the top of the sky, looking down on all living things. Yun Tianyi was like an ant that had been knocked down to the ground and could only look up. "Xiao Chen, you've won." Suddenly, Yun Tianyi shouted. His voice resounded through the heavens and earth. Everyone on the battlefield could hear his voice. Following his words, Yun Tianyi no longer hesitated and raised his sword to commit suicide. His corpse fell beside his father, and the father and son hugged each other as they fell into eternal sleep. At the last moment, Yun Tianyi displayed the pride that a prodigy should have. He didn't beg for mercy and only regretted what he had done in the past. He also paid the price for his choice. Xiao Chen lightly spat out a mouthful of turbid air. With the death of the Yun father and son, the outcome of this battle was already decided. Pass down my orders. Bury Yun Chen and Yun Tianyi together. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 25-33. The death of Yun Tianyi and Yun Chen made people sigh, but it didn't affect Xiao Chen too much. After all, the father and son had chosen a dead end right from the start. The death of Yun Tianyi and Yun Chen made people sigh, but it didn't affect Xiao Chen too much. After all, the father and son had chosen a dead end right from the start. However, in Dao Ju and Li Chun's hearts, besides feeling sorry for Yun Tianyi and Yun Chen, they were also shocked by Xiao Chen's strength. Before the battle, no one would have thought that Xiao Chen would be able to kill Yun Chen so easily. All along, Yun Chen's breakthrough to the ancestor realm had given everyone a lot of pressure. However, in front of Xiao Chen, Yun Chen, an ancestor realm elite, was like a paper tiger that couldn't even withstand a single blow. Xiao Chen's confidence was never groundless. Since he said that he was not afraid of Yun Chen, then he must have the confidence to win. Regarding this, Xiao Chen used the facts to prove himself. He had indeed killed Yun Chen as easily as smashing rotten wood. With the death of Yun Chen and Yun Tianyi, the following matters were much easier to resolve. The various major forces that had chosen Mu Tian Mountain's camp no longer had any fighting power. As for the various elites of Mu Tian Mountain, Xiao Chen didn't even give them a chance to surrender. Mu Tian Mountain had to be destroyed, and there was no room for mercy. As for the other forces that had chosen to side with Mu Tian Mountain, they could be spared for the time being. However, they would naturally have to pay a corresponding price. At the same time, the major forces that had chosen Mu Tian Mountain would probably have a hard time in the future. Who asked them to stand on the wrong side? They would probably have to hand over all the resources they had, and the Sword Sect would also bestow these resources to the forces that had chosen the Sword Sect. It could be considered a reward. The outcome of the battle was very clear. With the death of Yunchen and Yunchen, Mu Tian Mountain no longer had any chance of winning. The battle was already one-sided. Facing the fierce attacks of the Sword Sect, Mu Tian Mountain was forced to retreat. Many of their disciples died under the swords of the Sword Sect's disciples. Before the start of the battle, who would have thought that what was supposed to be an evenly matched battle where Mu Tian Mountain had the upper hand, would end so quickly and the Sword's Gate would emerge victorious? Xiao Chun didn't participate in the following battle. After killing a few Mu Tian Mountain Vice sects to ensure that the Sword Sect would win, Xiao Qin went to the main hall of Mu Tian Mountain to wait for the outcome of the battle. Dao Ju, Xiao, and Xiao Xiao were naturally by his side. And, in just a few months, Xiao had actually broken through to the Peak Emperor realm. In a few months, and Xiao's and the three of them were secretly excited about breaking through to the Emperor realm. But Xiao Chen's progress was even greater than theirs. He was now only a step away from the Ancestor realm. What was even more shocking was Xiao Chen's strength. He killed Yun Chen, who was an Ancestor realm cultivator. Xiao Chen was still the same Xiao Chen. His combat strength was unparalleled. Noticing the strange looks of Dao Ju and the others, Xiao Chen smiled. "Why do you three keep staring at me?" Xiao Chen's attitude towards Dao Ju and the others hadn't changed at all. He was very easygoing. Although the Sword Sect could be said to be a well-deserved overlord of the Great Thousand World, Xiao Chen didn't change his attitude towards the people around him because of his rise in status. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the heartless Dao Ju was the first to laugh. "It's nothing. We were just shocked by you." Dao Ju could feel that Xiao Chen's attitude towards them hadn't changed. He still treated the three of them as his friends, so he also joked casually. In response, Xiao Chen rolled his eyes at him. Since they were casually chatting in the hall, Song Xing strode into the hall and reported to Xiao Chen. "Sect Master, there is no one left alive in Mu Tian Mountain." The battle was over. Mu Tian Mountain had been completely wiped out by the Sword Sect. From Yun Chen, Yun Tianyi and his son, to the ordinary disciples, no one was left alive. Hearing Song Xing's words, Dao Ju and the other two's eyelids twitched. It ended so quickly. Furthermore, Xiao Chen was too ruthless. No one was left alive. He had really wiped out the entire Mu Tian Mountain. Xiao Chen didn't wipe out Mu Tian Mountain completely because he wanted to give the other forces in the Great Thousand World a warning. He wanted to tell them that if they were to have any evil thoughts in the future, they should think twice about the outcome of Mu Tian Mountain. The Sword Sect had just gained control of the Great Thousand World, so they naturally had to use strong method. Blindly showing mercy wouldn't be of much use at this point in time. In fact, it might even cause others to look down on them. Xiao Chen's expression didn't change at all. Hearing that, Song Xing only nodded slightly. Seeing that, Song Xing continued to ask, "What should we do about the forces in Mu Tian Mountain?" "Ask them to hand over their various resources and cultivation secret realms," Xiao Chen said plainly. Xiao Chen could let off the forces who had chosen Mu Tian Mountain, but he couldn't let them off unscathed. Asking them to hand over their resources and cultivation secret realms was their punishment. Think about it, if a force didn't have any cultivation resources and cultivation secret realms, what would happen to them? They would probably be defeated in no time. However, they couldn't blame anyone for that as they had chosen the wrong side. If they wanted to stay alive, they had to pay a price. If they didn't have to pay a price for choosing the wrong side, they would be dreaming. The Sword Sect definitely wouldn't be interested in these cultivation resources and cultivation secret realms. When the time came, they would distribute them to the forces who had supported the Sword Sect as a reward. At the same time, it would also show the other forces that the Sword Sect was never stingy to its supporters. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Song Xing nodded. There was no need to ask any more questions. Since Xiao Chen had said so, the forces who had chosen Mu Tian Mountain only had two choices. One was to sacrifice their wealth to save their lives and hand over their cultivation resources and cultivation secret realms. This way, their forces would fall quickly, but at least they would be able to preserve their lives. Furthermore, they might be able to slowly recover in the future. As for rejecting, they could only follow in Mu Tian Mountain's footsteps and be wiped out. Song Xing went to finish up the work. Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and Gu Lingyao walked into the main hall at this time. Seeing them, Xiao Chen smiled. However, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao seemed a little depressed. It was obvious that they were frightened by the battle just now. It was no wonder. Although the two of them were fearless at home, they had never experienced anything like this before. It was normal for the two of them to find it difficult to adapt to the battlefield for the first time. There was no hurry. There was still a long time before the two of them grew up. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 25-34. Perhaps they were frightened, but Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were very well behaved and did not even dare to leave Qin Shuru and Fairy of 100 Flowers. Xiao Chen was secretly amused by this. Although the two of them were usually very daring, they were still children after all. Perhaps they were frightened, but Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were very well behaved and did not even dare to leave Qin Shuru and Fairy of 100 Flowers. Xiao Chen was secretly amused by this. Although the two of them were usually very daring, they were still children after all. He did not bother about the two of them. As Xiao Chen's sons, the two of them would have to experience these things sooner or later. It was just a matter of time. The battle was completely over, and Xiao Chen did not need to worry about the remaining matters. Song Xing and Fairy of 100 Flowers would handle it. However, Xiao Chen was not in a hurry to go to Mu Tian Mountain. Now that Mu Tian Mountain had been destroyed, the other forces in the Great Thousand World should be more obedient. Those forces that had previously chosen to remain neutral and watch would also soon make their choice. In this battle, the Sword Sect had brought out a force that was enough to shock the entire Great Thousand World. Mu Tian Mountain, which seemed to have a higher chance of winning, was easily defeated by the Sword Sect. It could even be said that they did not even have much power to resist. This outcome had practically solidified the Sword Sect's position as the overlord of the Great Thousand World. They temporarily stayed at Mu Tian Mountain. As expected, on the second day, many forces that had remained neutral announced that they were willing to submit to the Sword Sect. The Sword Sect had given them the answer with their strength. As long as they were not stupid, they would understand that the situation in the Great Thousand World had completely changed after this battle. At this point, if these forces wanted to continue surviving, they only had one choice, and that was to submit to the Sword Sect. Many forces expressed their stance one after another. This time, they didn't hesitate at all. Or rather, they had no other choice unless they wanted to die. Xiao Chen was not surprised by this as he had expected it. However, among the 10 great Ling Tian sects, other than the Saber Sect, the Moon Palace, and the Heavenly Policy Mansion, the other sects had yet to give an answer. The former 10 great Ling Tian sects were now a second-tier force second only to the Sword Sect. They were also one of the top forces in the Great Thousand World. If they wanted to submit to the Sword Sect, they would have to consider many things. Of course, what they were most worried about was their own interest. After all, although the Ling Tian sect looked mighty and domineering, the amount of resources required to maintain such a behemoth was astronomical. If they had to pay such a high price to submit to the sword sect, it would be difficult for them to maintain it. In that case, these Ling Tian sects would probably hesitate. However, after the incident at Mu Tian Mountain, the remaining Ling Tian sects had learned their lesson. They did not have the intention to go against the Sword's Gate. After all, they could not win against the Sword's Gate. Everyone knew that. Therefore, early the next morning, the people from Dan Valley and Rune sect personally came to Mu Tian Mountain to negotiate with Shaochen. The people who came were the two emperors, Dan Qingyang and Fu Di. The fact that the two ancestors came personally showed that they valued this matter very much. Shaochen personally received them and gave them enough face. It used to be the main hall of Mu Tian Mountain. However, Mu Tian Mountain no longer existed. Everything that belonged to Mu Tian Mountain naturally belonged to Sword Sect. The main hall of Mu Tian Mountain was temporarily requisitioned. Shaochen, Dan Qingyang, and Fu Di sat together in a circle. There were only the three of them in the main hall, and it seemed a little empty. Without beating around the bush, Dan Qingyang took the lead and said, "The Sword Sect is really powerful now. To be honest with you, Sect Leader Shao, the two of us are here today to discuss the matter of joining the Sword Sect." They went straight to the point and addressed Shaochen as Sect Leader Shao. It was obvious that Dan Qingyang and Fu Di's attitude towards the Sword Sect and Shaochen had changed. Speaking of which, Shaochen was definitely Dan Qingyang's junior. When he first took over Sword's Gate, Dan Qingyang had even helped Shaochen. But now, Dan Qingyang was treating Shaochen as someone of the same generation, and there was even a hint of respect in his tone. However, Shaochen didn't care about this. He even took the initiative to say with a smile, "Senior Qingyang, you're too kind. You can just call me by my name. There's no need for this." Shaochen naturally wouldn't forget Dan Qingyang's kindness. Therefore, Shaochen was very respectful to Dan Qingyang most of the time. Of course, this was under the circumstances that it didn't cross the bottom line. Shaochen respected Dan Qingyang as an elder. However, if Dan Qingyang did something that harmed the interests of the Sword Sect, Shaochen wouldn't turn a blind eye to it. For example, Dan Valley and Talisman Sect had to submit to the Sword Sect. There was no way to compromise or make concessions on this point. However, putting aside this issue of principle, Shaochen could make things more convenient for Dan Qingyang. Upon hearing Shaochen's words, Dan Qingyang smiled slightly. Dan Qingyang was very optimistic about Shaochen from the beginning to the end. However, Dan Qingyang was also very shocked that Shaochen could reach this step today. This little guy's progress was really too great. It was as if Shaochen had grown up overnight and surpassed these old guys. With the previous friendship between Shaochen and Dan Qingyang, coupled with the sincerity of Dan Qingyang and Fu Di this time, the following conversation was very casual and harmonious. There wasn't too much tension. According to Dan Qingyang, Dan Valley and Talisman Sect could submit to the Sword Sect. However, the Sword Sect couldn't ask for too many tributes every year. After all, the consumption of these two forces was quite large. This was the only request of Dan Qingyang and Fu Di, and it was also to continue the operation of their respective forces. After all, if all the cultivation resources were given to the Sword Sect, Dan Valley and Talisman Sect wouldn't need to exist anymore and would just disband on the spot. Upon hearing Dan Qingyang's words, Shaochen smiled slightly and said, "Senior, do you think I'm like a bandit now? Don't worry, the Sword Sect won't let any force give tribute. Not only that, but we will also help those forces that choose to join the Sword Sect. The Saber Sect is an example. Senior, you can ask Saber Xiong and the others. Did the Sword Sect ask them to hand over any resources?" Upon hearing this, Shaochen said with a smile, thinking that Dan Qingyang was worried about something. The Sword Sect indeed didn't need any tributes. The Sword Sect was definitely an existence that was overflowing with wealth. Just the various cultivation resources under their hands were already terrifying. Moreover, after becoming the overlord of the vast thousand world, the Sword Sect could be said to have completely controlled the various resources of the vast thousand world. In this way, would they still need to scheme against other forces? Shao Chen naturally wouldn't do something like killing the goose that laid the golden eggs. If he wanted the vast thousand world to be truly stable, he would need the various forces to truly submit to him willingly. Using force to oppress others was a method, but it was definitely not the Sword Sect's goal. Submitting to the Sword Sect wholeheartedly was the result that Shao Chen and the Sword Sect wanted. They didn't want to rely solely on using force to oppress the various forces and make them feel threatened and have no choice but to submit to them. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 25-35. The Sword Sect had never thought of seizing any benefits from other forces. Firstly, the Sword Sect did not lack these things, and ordinary treasures were nothing in the eyes of the higher-ups of the Sword Sect. Hence, there was no need for them to do so. The Sword Sect had never thought of seizing any benefits from other forces. Firstly, the Sword Sect did not lack these things, and ordinary treasures were nothing in the eyes of the higher-ups of the Sword Sect. Hence, there was no need for them to do so. Secondly, the Sword Sect wanted to control the Great Thousand World. It should not be a world where only the Sword Sect existed, but a world where hundreds of flowers bloomed. Imagine if there was only one force in the entire Great Thousand World, the Sword Sect. What would it be like? Furthermore, would the Sword Sect alone have the ability or the manpower to deal with the matters of the entire Great Thousand World? It might be possible to deal with major matters, but what about the trivial matters? Would the Sword Sect alone be able to deal with all aspects? Hence, the Sword Sect could not destroy all the forces in the Great Thousand World. To put it bluntly, the current Sword Sect, or rather Shao Chen's idea, was to set the rules. The Sword Sect would set the new rules of the Great Thousand World, and all the major forces in the Great Thousand World would have to revolve around these rules. This was the Sword Sect, or rather, Shao Chen's real idea. Hence, not only would Shao Chen not exploit the forces that chose to submit to the Sword Sect, but he would even give them some benefits so that they would remember the benefits of the Sword Sect. Since Shao Chen had given his guarantee, Dan Qingyang and Fu Di naturally had nothing else to say. They immediately expressed that Dan Valley and Fu Di were willing to submit to the Sword Sect. After hearing their declarations, Shao Chen smiled. It seemed that the Sword Sect's prestige had indeed increased greatly after defeating Mu Tian Mountain. This was good too. At least the following matters would be much easier to handle. That day, at Mu Tian Mountain, Shao Chen held a banquet to celebrate Dan Qingyang and Fu Di's defection. Moreover, the news quickly spread. Hearing that even the Dan Valley and the Talisman Sect had submitted to the Sword Sect, more and more forces made their choice. After the banquet ended and they returned to their residence, Shao Chen did not rest. Instead, he discussed some matters with Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. This time, Dan Valley and Talisman Sect's allegiance is indeed very important. Xianyuan Ling took a sip of tea and said. After hearing Xianyuan Ling's words, Shao Chen nodded noncommittally. However, he sighed softly and said, "Now the situation in the Great Thousand World has stabilized, but it is still far from what I want." After hearing Shao Chen's words, Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing were stunned. The two of them obviously did not understand what Shao Chen meant. The current situation could be said to be very good, but Shao Chen seemed to be far from achieving his goal. However, in the eyes of Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, the Sword Sect's current development was already very good. Moreover, its position as the overlord of the Great Thousand World was already worthy of its name. The two of them did not know or could not understand what Xiao Chen was trying to say. Seeing their expressions, Xiao Chen smiled. Big brother, second sister, what do you think of this sword sect now? It has been reborn. It is worthy of being the #1 force in the Great Thousand World, Xian Yuanling replied. Although Long Qing did not say anything, she nodded in agreement. However, Xiao Chen shook his head and said, It's not enough. This is far from enough. Big brother, second sister, you have seen the Cloud Palace and Immortal Palace with your own eyes. The Sword Sect is simply too far away from these two forces. The Sword Sect was indeed worthy of being the overlord of the Great Thousand World. If one only looked at the Great Thousand World, the Sword Sect was indeed powerful enough. Not to mention that no one would be able to surpass it in the future, it was at least unprecedented. After all, in the history of the Great Thousand World, there had never been a force that could suppress the heroes of the Great Thousand World like the Sword Sect and make them bow down to it. From this point of view, the Sword Sect was indeed very strong. However, was Xiao Chen's vision really limited to the Great Thousand World? This was clearly impossible. After seeing the power and prosperity of other universes, and after seeing the Cloud Palace and Immortal Palace, Xiao Chen's vision was no longer limited to the Great Thousand World. In Xiao Chen's mind, dominating the Great Thousand World was not a goal at all. This was because this was something that had to be done. The Sword Sect could definitely do it, so it could not be called a goal at all. Xiao Chen's true goal was to develop the Sword Sect to the level of Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace, so that the Sword Sect could be on par with Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace in the future. This was Xiao Chen's goal. With the Sword Sect's current situation, it was indeed as difficult as ascending to the heavens to achieve this goal. After all, the strength of the Cloud Palace and Immortal Palace was enough to make the Sword Sect, or rather, the entire Great Thousand World, look up to them. Meanwhile, if the Sword Sect wanted to achieve this goal, it was not something that could be done purely through hard work. The trials and tribulations they had to go through would definitely not be few, to the extent where it could be said to be unavoidable. However, this was precisely what Xiao Chen thought. The Sword Sect had to become powerful, had to become one of the greatest powers in the countless universes. In Xiao Chen's mind, even though the Cloud Palace and Immortal Palace seemed to be extremely generous in helping out this time, Xiao Chen was sure that there was definitely a secret behind this that he did not know about. If there was no secret behind this, there was no way Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace would help the Sword Sect without asking for anything in return. Meanwhile, Xiao Chen did not wish for the relationship between the two sides to continue like this. In other words, the Sword Sect, Immortal Palace, and Cloud Palace looked like they were partners, but with the Sword Sect's strength, it was truly difficult for them to climb up to these two great powers. If this continued for a long time, how was the Sword Sect supposed to get along with Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace? Were they going to rely on them or submit to these two great powers? Or were they going to become guns in the hands of these two great powers? Or cannon fodder? These results, regardless of which one it was, were clearly not what Xiao Chen wanted to see. That was why Xiao Chen wanted the Sword Sect to become stronger, to the point where they could stand on equal footing with Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace. Only like this could the relationship between the three great powers truly reach a balance. In this world, strength was everything. Regardless of who one interacted with, whether one's fist was strong or not was the most important issue. Blindly relying on the strength of others, or waiting for the help of others, Xiao Chen understood clearly what the final result would be. Meanwhile, this type of result was definitely not something Xiao Chen wanted to see. That was why Xiao Chen wanted the Sword Sect to become stronger on their own, to have a power that did not need to rely on Immortal Palace and the Sword Sect's help, to have the ability to face all threats on their own. This was the goal the Sword Sect should pursue in the future. Xiao Chen's thoughts and goals. When they heard these words, Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing stared blankly. They never expected Xiao Chun to actually be thinking about these things the entire time. Seeing the two's continuously changing expressions, Xiao Chun indifferently said, "Big brother, second sister, the great world is only one of the countless universes. We shouldn't place our sights on this. The sword sect is the same. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of this chapter. Chapter 25-36. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing were stunned. Then they smiled bitterly. It turned out that their third brother's vision was no longer limited to the Great Thousand World. It was ridiculous that the two of them were still paying attention to the matters of the Great Thousand World. At this moment, the two of them seemed to have figured out why Xiao Chen was so indifferent to the matters of Mu Tianshan previously. This was because Xiao Chen's vision was no longer on Mu Tianshan, or rather, it was no longer on the Great Thousand World. To put it bluntly, perhaps in Xiao Chen's heart, no matter what happened in the Great Thousand World, Xiao Chen would not be too concerned because the sword sect was fully capable of handling it. Since that was the case, why should he care? The position of the overlord of the Great Thousand World and the internal struggles of the Great Thousand World had long been forgotten by Xiao Chen. So what if the Great Thousand World was in a mess? It was just a Great Thousand World and would not amount to anything. Moreover, the matters of the Great Thousand World could not threaten the sword sect at all. Although Xiao Chen was the youngest among the three of them, Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing had to admit that Xiao Chen was the most outstanding one among the three of them from the beginning. Even as the eldest brother and second sister, they had to look up to Xiao Chen. Seeing the two of them shake their heads and smile bitterly, Xiao Chen smiled and said, "I'm just thinking about it a little more. Eldest brother and second sister, you don't have to belittle me. No, this is different. It's not a matter of thinking or not. It's a matter of perspective." Long Qing was the first to speak up. Second sister is right. We can't compare to you, third brother. However, we don't need to think about these things. Who asked us to have such an outstanding third brother? It's fine as long as your vision is big enough. In any case, your second sister and I will be your assistants. Hearing that, Xianyuan Ling continued. Yes, eldest brother is right. If you want me to think about these things, you might as well kill me. Long Qing laughed. Hearing their words, Xiao Chen felt a warmth in his heart. The three of them had been together for so long, and it could be said that they were completely connected. Xiao Chen's perspective and ambition did not affect Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing at all. Hence, the two of them would not be jealous. Although the three of them were sworn brothers and Xiao Chen was the youngest, it seemed that Xiao Chen was the backbone of the three of them from the beginning. Whether it was Xianyuan Ling or Long Qing, they had always listened to Xiao Chen's words. After being with him for so long, these things had been deeply had become a habit, and Qing and had become a lot's attention had become a habit, had become a habit, had become a habit, had become a habit. After all, Xiao. Moreover, the relationship between the three siblings now, how to put it? There was no such thing as loyalty anymore. To put it bluntly, the only thing left between the three siblings was kinship. They were the closest people to each other in this world, so how could they be jealous of the people closest to them? Xiao Chen was naturally not worried about Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling thinking too much. With a smile, Xiao Chen continued, however, if our sword sect wants to grow, it will be very difficult to rely on the current situation. Although Senior Tsang Xing and the others are already half-step Emperor Realm experts, it will be very difficult for them to break through to the Ancestor Realm. Therefore, if our sword sect wants to develop, we must rope in some people with even more outstanding talent. You mean Dao Ju and the others? Hearing this, Xianyuan Ling immediately understood Xiao Chen's meaning. Shao Chen wanted to develop the Sword Sect into a colossus on the same level as Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace. To achieve this goal, the number of Ancestor Realm experts was indispensable. If nothing unexpected happened, the Sword Sect would soon have its first Ancestor Realm expert overseeing it, and that was Jun Wuya. After cultivating in seclusion for such a long time, Jun Wuyuan should not have any problems breaking through to the Ancestor Realm. However, Jun Wuya alone was clearly not enough. Although Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling also had a high chance of breaking through to the Ancestor Realm, what about Song Xing and the other vice sect leaders? It wasn't that it was impossible for them to break through to the Ancestor Realm. However, compared to young geniuses like Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling, Song Xing and the others were too old. Moreover, there was already a gap in their natural talent. So, it was even more difficult for them to break through to the Ancestor Realm. In this way, Shao Chen could only find someone else. Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, Li Chun and the other young geniuses entered Shao Chen's sight. If they were in the same cultivation environment, Dao Ju and the others had a higher chance of breaking through to the Ancestor Realm than Song Xing and the others. He wanted to recruit Dao Ju and the others, but the prerequisite was that they had to enter the Sword Sect and become members of the Sword Sect. To put it bluntly, Shao Chen did this because he wanted to integrate the resources of the Great Thousand World and rope in the group of people with the most talent and potential into the Sword Sect. He wanted to use this group of the most elite people in the Great Thousand World to become the most powerful force in the Great Thousand World. However, it was not easy to get Dao Ju and the others to join the Sword Sect. In other words, it was not easy to get them to sincerely join the Sword Sect. Xiao Xiao should have no problem, and Luo Xing would not stop him. However, what about Dao Ju and Li Chun? Even if the two of them were willing, would Dao Xiong and Li Xiao agree? Would they let Dao Ju and Li Chun join the Sword Sect? This was what Xianyuan Ling was worried about. However, Shao Chen smiled and said, "Big brother, I don't just want Dao Ju and the others to join the Sword Sect. I want the forces behind them as well." "You want to gather the forces of the 10 great Ling Tian sects and build a new Sword Sect?" Xianyuan Ling asked in surprise. It had to be said that Shao Chen's idea was too bold. In this regard, Shao Chen did not hide it and nodded truthfully. "That's true. This is the only way to ensure everyone's loyalty. If the whole family joins the Sword Sect, would they still harm the Sword Sect in the future? That's true, but it's not easy. Third brother, you have to think about it carefully. This is something that will affect the whole situation," Xianyuan Ling replied. Shao Chen naturally knew the difficulty of this. For example, although Dan Valley and Talisman Sect had submitted to the Sword Sect, this was completely different from joining the Sword Sect. Shao Chen had only temporarily stabilized them. However, Shao Chen was still confident because the situation in the Great Thousand World had completely changed. It was a completely different situation from the past. Such a situation would not change in the slightest as time passed. In fact, it might even become more and more intense. When the time came, Shao Chen would be more confident if he wanted Dao Ju and the others to join the Sword Sect. In fact, Dao Ju and the others would probably not have any resistance. After all, this was the current of the times, and it was not something that could be stopped or changed by a single person. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 2537. Based on the current situation, the development of the Sword Sect would only get better and better. In the future, the Great Thousand World would definitely be in constant contact with other universes. By then, not only Shao Chen, but the warriors of the other Great Thousand World would also know how vast the outside world was. Based on the current situation, the development of the Sword Sect would only get better and better. In the future, the Great Thousand World would definitely be in constant contact with other universes. By then, not only Shao Chen, but the warriors of the other great thousand world would also know how vast the outside world was. Once their horizons were broadened, they would naturally not place all their attention on the great thousand world. By then, it would obviously be much easier for Shao Chen to merge the Saber Sect and other forces into the Sword Sect. Of course, this matter could only be done step by step. As of now, there was no need to rush. If Shao Chen showed that he wanted to merge the Saber Sect and other forces into the Sword Sect, it would definitely cause a backlash. Hence, it was better to wait for now. This matter was not urgent. Now, stabilizing the Great Thousand World was the Sword Sect's top priority. However, this was not a difficult matter for the Sword Sect. They could just leave it to Cang Xing and the others to handle. That night, Shao Chen, Xian Yuanling, and Long Qing chatted until late at night. Shao Chen could only say this in front of Xian Yuanling and Long Qing. After all, Shao Chen had absolute trust in the two of them and did not have the slightest doubt. After a night of silence, early the next morning, after Shao Chen finished a night of cultivation, he strolled around Mu Tian Mountain. When he saw that the Sword Sect had taken away all the cultivation resources and cultivation mystic realms that used to belong to Mu Tian Mountain, Shao Chen smiled faintly. These cultivation mystic realms and resources might not be worth mentioning to Shao Chen and were not of much use. However, to the disciples of the Sword Sect, these were all good things. With these things, the treatment of the disciples of the Sword Sect would probably be improved. It was no wonder that they were all in a good mood when they met Cang Xing and the others. The matters of Mu Tian Mountain were coming to an end. The various forces that had chosen Mu Tian Mountain had already returned and were preparing to hand over their cultivation resources and cultivation mystic realms to the Sword Sect. Shao Chen was naturally not worried about these forces and was not afraid of what they would do unless they did not want to live. After strolling around Mu Tian Mountain for a while, Shao Chen, and the other Qin Shuru Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were playing in the courtyard. After a night of rest, the mood of the two little guys was obviously much better, and they had recovered their previous mischievous thoughts. "Daddy, when are we going back? It's so boring here." Seeing that Shao Chen had returned, the two ran over and pestered Shao Chen. The initial excitement had already worn off. The two little fellows were clamoring to return to the Sword Sect. Shao Chen laughed and scolded them. "Why? Weren't you the ones who begged to come? Why are you leaving now?" The two little fellows grew up under Shao Chen's meticulous care. They were at a height that ordinary people could not reach. Their cultivation was not bad, but at this age, the two of them were still a little playful. Hearing Shao Chen's words, the two of them pouted but could not find any reason to refute him. After all, they were the ones who had clamored to come to Mu Tian Mountain. Seeing the two little fellows like this, Shao Chen laughed and said, "All right, we'll go back in a few days." Mu Tian Mountain definitely could not be completed in a short period of time. However, Shao Chen did not have to stay here all the time. Cang Xing and the others could stay behind. Hearing Shao Chen's words, the two little fellows smiled and nodded. They followed Shao Chen to the pavilion. Seeing the two little fellows who both loved and feared Shao Chen, Qin Shuru and the other girls smiled faintly. "How was it? Did things go smoothly?" Shao Chen sat down and 100-Flower Fairy personally poured a cup of tea for Shao Chen as she asked. "Very smoothly." Shao Chen nodded and replied. The dust had settled and Shao Chen could relax. Shao Chen would probably be able to accompany his family for a long time. This was something that Shao Chen had always hoped for. It was rare for him to have such a relaxing time. Shao Chen also felt the joy that he had not felt in a long time. He chatted with Qin Shuru and the other girls and watched the two naughty little fellows, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao, play by the side. This kind of life was indeed not bad. While chatting, Shao Chen also heard some things about Luan from Qin Shuru and the other girls. "What's wrong with Luan?" Shao Chen asked. "It's nothing. However, I heard that she has been very close to Qin Kunlun recently. Moreover, Qin Kunlun seems to be pursuing Luan Luan. Qin Shuru replied. Luan Luan was indeed a young lady now, and it was said that Qin Kunlun had been fiercely pursuing Luan Luan during this period of time. Although Luan Luan did not agree to this, she did not show too much resistance. It was said that the two of them had been very close recently. After hearing this, Xiao Chen frowned slightly. Although this was a matter between the younger generation and Luan Luan was not young anymore, Xiao Chen did not know why, but he felt that his cabbage was being eaten by a pig. He was inexplicably unhappy. Although Luan Luan was not Xiao Chen's biological daughter, Xiao Chen had never treated Luan Luan as an outsider. Even after Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were born, Xiao Chen's love for Luan Luan did not decrease in the slightest. However, this child had grown up and Luan Luan was now one of the top 10 disciples of the Sword Sect. Naturally, she could not accompany Xiao Chen and Qin Shuru for a lot of time. Everyone could understand this. After all, a child had grown up and had her own ideas. You could not blindly force her. However, Xiao Chen had never heard that Qin Kunlun was pursuing Luan Luan all this time. Xiao Chen was naturally familiar with Qin Kunlun. This boy was the #1 disciple of the sword fanatic. He could be regarded as the eldest disciple of the sword sect. He was very talented and indeed did not disappoint Xiao Chen over the years. However, since this matter involved Luan Luan, Xiao Chen did not know why, but he suddenly felt that this eldest disciple of the sword sect was not so cute anymore. This Qin Kunlun actually dares to have designs on my Luan Luan? He sneered. Achoo. On the other side, Qin Kunlun, who was handling the matters of Mount Mu with Xiao Luan, suddenly sneezed and muttered inexplicably, "Who is talking about me?" As he said that, Qin Kunlun subconsciously glanced at Xiao Luan. After a few years, Xiao Luan had grown into a slender and elegant woman. She wore a long white dress and looked like a goddess who had descended to the mortal world. Her appearance was not inferior to Qin Shuru and the rest when they were young. In the sword sect, Xiao Luan was indeed very popular. Not only because of her identity, but also because of her appearance, talent, and strength. It could be said that she was the daughter of many people who doted on her. Could it be that Qin Kunlun was unable to avoid this and fell hopelessly in love with Xiao Luan? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2538. Looking at Xiao Luan's gaze, Qin Kunlun revealed a look of infatuation. That's right, he had been pursuing Xiao Luan for a long time, but until now, they still hadn't confirmed their relationship. Looking at Xiao Luan's gaze, Qin Kunlun revealed a look of infatuation. That's right, he had been pursuing Xiao Luan for a long time, but until now, they still hadn't confirmed their relationship. In fact, with Qin Kunlun's qualifications, he could get any girl he wanted. Just in the sword sect alone, there were many female disciples who admired Qin Kunlun, but he just had to fall in love with Xiao Luan. Regarding this, although Xiao Luan didn't have much resistance, she obviously didn't accept Qin Kunlun's pursuit, which made Qin Kunlun rather depressed. Since young, he had never adored a girl like this. Sensing Qin Kunlun's gaze, Xiao Luan turned her head and said with some confusion, "Why do you keep looking at me?" "Nothing, I just like looking at you." Hearing this, Qin Kunlun revealed a silly smile. In front of others, Qin Kunlun was always the tyrannical first disciple of the sword sect, but in front of Xiao Luan, Qin Kunlun seemed to have become a silly boy. Looking at Qin Kunlun's appearance, Xiao Luan rolled her eyes at him and didn't say anything else. She knew that Qin Kunlun liked her, but Xiao Luan didn't accept it. Xiao Luan guessed that the problem was her family. Compared to Qin Kunlun, Xiao Luan naturally preferred to be by Xiao Chen's side. Thinking of Xiao Chen, Xiao Luan revealed a faint smile. It had been a long time since she ate with her father. Ever since Xiao Luan became one of the top 10 first sword disciples of the sword sect, she indeed hadn't seen Xiao Chen for a long time. Even if they met, the father and daughter would just casually chat for a while before going on with their own matters. Thinking of how her father had finally returned to the sword sect, Xiao Luan also wanted to go home when she could. Seeing Xiao Luan smile, Qin Kunlun asked curiously, "Junior sister Xiao Luan, what are you smiling about? What does it have to do with you?" "I'm thinking of my father," Xiao Luan replied snappily. "Father? Sect leader Xiao Chen?" Hearing this, Qin Kunlun immediately became speechless. Xiao Chen was definitely a huge mountain on top of Qin Kunlun. Many times when he thought of Xiao Luan's father, Xiao Chen, the person who had dominated the entire Great Thousand World, Qin Kunlun's father, he instantly lost his tempers. Speaking, his family was obviously nothing compared to the sect, the sword sect. The Qin family was obviously nothing compared to the sect of the sword sects. His family was obviously the compared. Kunlun of in of this, ins in s of a's ins in the past, the most definitely the. What a joke! Xiao Luan was the beloved daughter of the sect leader of the sword sect, Xiao Chen. Just this identity alone was enough for Xiao Luan to do whatever she wanted in the Great Thousand World. Who would dare to offend her? However, Xiao Luan had never used Xiao Chen's name to bully others. Most of the time, Xiao Luan had never taken the initiative to reveal her family background. In Xiao Luan's opinion, her father was her father, and she was herself. Furthermore, with Xiao Luan's pride, she didn't want to use her father's name to protect her. Xiao Luan wanted to rely on her own abilities to make a name for herself. While the two of them were dealing with the finishing touches of the Mu Tian Mountain, on the other hand, after hearing Qin Shuru and the others talk about Xiao Luan and Qin Kunlun, Xiao Chen couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. This brat actually has designs on Luan. Why? Are you jealous? Hearing this, Hong Xiu asked with a smile. Xiao Chen was indeed a little jealous. However, given Xiao Chen's character, he naturally wouldn't admit it. Rolling his eyes at Hong Xiu, Xiao Chen pretended to be calm and said, "How is that possible? However, we still have to be careful about Luan's matter. Whether Qin Kunlun is capable or not, I still have to personally test him." Xiao Chen said it with a strong sense of righteousness. However, as someone who knew Xiao Chen's character well, the girls knew that he was just putting on a strong front. Flower Fairy even exposed him with a smile. "Still saying that you're not jealous? You're just short of writing the word jealous on your face. You, the children and grandchildren have their own blessings. Luan has also grown up. Let the children handle their own matters. Furthermore, I've seen Qin Kunlun. He's a good lad, but his family background is slightly inferior. However, our family doesn't care about that. You don't worry about this matter. Let them handle it themselves," Qin Shuru added. Qin Kunlun's family background is slightly inferior? If this was said by someone else, Qin Kunlun would probably fly into a rage. However, since it was said by Qin Shuru, Qin Kunlun obviously didn't have any temper. Indeed, compared to the Xiao family, his Qin family really couldn't be compared. Seeing that the girls were all trying to persuade him, Xiao Chen became even more displeased. "Qin Kunlun, you're secretly having ideas about my Luan. He didn't know what he was feeling in his heart. In any case, it was very uncomfortable." However, on the surface, Xiao Chen still pretended as if nothing had happened and said, Fine. Since you all said so, then I won't interfere. Speaking of which, I haven't seen Luan for a long time. You two go and call Luan back. Tonight, our family will have dinner together." While speaking to Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao, Xiao Chen secretly thought to himself, "Brat, it's still too early for you to have ideas about my Luan. Xiao Chen wasn't like Qin Shuru and the others.